Welcome back to part 2 of the supercut What If Harry Was in Slytherin. This is going to cover Order of the Phoenix all the way to the end of Deathly Hallows. If you haven't seen part 1 though, I would recommend you go watch that first. Otherwise, enjoy What If Harry Was in Slytherin. Alright you guys, let's dive on into what happens if Harry is in Slytherin Year 5. As usual, we start off in little whinging, and as usual, not much changes. The Ministry has still been discrediting Dumbledore and Harry, and Umbridge still sends the Dementors after Harry. The only real change is that Cedric survived the last book, so Dudley doesn't taunt Harry about his dreams, but the Dementors do still attack, and Harry does still fend them off, which means he is promptly expelled from Hogwarts. Or should I say illegally expelled, and only for like 3 minutes, because then another owl arrives and unexpels him, but he does still have to go to trial. Shortly after that, the Order tricks the Dursleys into attending a fake lawn competition award ceremony, and that absolutely still happens because it's hilarious. And then they whisk Harry away to their brand new headquarters at number 12, Grimmauld Place. Harry promptly enters angsty Harry mode where he yells at everybody, attends his first Order of the Phoenix meeting, and then gets the cleaning with everybody else. Interestingly, the Order, which is already in the main story having trouble recruiting people to their cause or just getting people to believe that Voldemort's back, is having even more trouble in this version of events. And this is of course because in this scenario, Cedric has survived. His dead body is usually a huge obstacle, this giant smoking gun piece of evidence that seems to corroborate what Harry is saying happened in the maze. And don't get me wrong, I'm really happy Cedric survived, but without a casualty, it really is just Harry and Dumbledore's word against the world. Or should I say the Ministry of Magic and the Daily Prophet, who I will remind you still has access to Rita Skeeter since Hermione didn't end up catching her at the end of last year like usual. Harry's trial goes the same as usual. Dumbledore shows up at the last second and logics the Wizengamot into clearing Harry of all charges before swiftly exiting the chamber and not making eye contact with him at all. Afterwards though, there is a minor change. Harry emerges from the chamber having been cleared and runs into Lucius Malfoy, who calls him Patronus Potter. Normally Harry makes some snide remark about how he escaped from Voldemort and Lucius was there. But this time Harry responds differently, saying, "What's the matter? Bothered your son's not the only one in our year that can cast a Patronus?" And this hits better than Harry thinks it will, but not for the reasons he thinks. Lucius makes no response at all because actually this is brand new information to him. He didn't know Draco could cast a Patronus. Because let's face it, casting a Patronus is an awfully good guy thing to do, and as far as Lucius is concerned, no son of his is a good guy! But from there, Harry returns back to Grimmauld Place, where everybody's Hogwarts letters are waiting for them, including some extra special badges this year. As usual, and even in this version of events, Ron and Hermione have been made the Gryffindor prefix, which usually causes Harry tremendous pangs of jealousy. This time though, Harry's not in Gryffindor, meaning that he's still not a prefect. Draco still gets the badge. And you might be wondering, wait, why? But it's the same reasoning Dumbledore gives in the main story. You may perhaps have wondered why I never chose you as a prefect. I must confess that I rather thought you had enough responsibility to be going on with. That said, Harry's letter doesn't come with nothing extra. He might not be a Slytherin prefect, but he has been made Slytherin Quidditch captain. Marcus Flint graduated the previous year, so the position would be open, and you might think, well, wait, if Dumbledore thought he had enough responsibility not to be a prefect, wouldn't he use the same reasoning to not make Harry the Quidditch captain? But no, for two reasons. One, Harry's gonna be going to Quidditch practice anyway, so it's not like extra time. But more importantly, Dumbledore is using this position to protect Harry. Usually in the main story, most of the school is unsure about whether or not they should believe Harry, including some of the Gryffindors. Ironically, the Slytherins, even in the main story, do not have this problem. Due to a lot of their parentage, most of them are very aware that Voldemort is back, but they also understand that pretending he's not is part of the plan and go along with acting like Harry's crazy. This time, however, Harry is in Slytherin, and Dumbledore recognizes that some of his housemates may now turn on him based on their family's beliefs and might even attack him. But giving him some authority as Quidditch captain and making him a larger outcome of how the Quidditch team does at least offers him some protection from outright attack in the common room. Also, before we move on, fun question for you guys here. Ron gets the prefect badge, which means he gets a reward, and typically he asks for a broom so that he can try out for the Gryffindor Quidditch team, but now he already has a broom and is already on the Quidditch team, and Fred and George already got him some brand new dress robes, and he already has an owl, so what do you think he asks for as his reward? It's not really a big plot point like at all, but it is fun to think about, like what would Ron ask for? My money is on a brand new nice chess set, because it is one of the things he has that he uses the hand-me-down of a lot.
Hand-me-down wizard's chess. You must be a Weasley.
Gotta say, that line works a lot better with Ron's enthusiasm tucked right into the middle. But anyway, from there, it's time to go back to Hogwarts. Ron and Hermione still have prefect duty on the train, so Harry still follows Ginny into Luna's compartment, where they are still joined by Neville. Neville is, of course, a lot less good friends with Harry in this version, since they don't spend so much time together in Gryffindor, but Neville still would have gone to the Yule Ball with Ginny last year, so yes, he would still sit with them. As such, everyone in the compartment still gets sprayed by the stink sap from the Mimbulus Mimbletonia, which is, a terrible endeavor to endure, but it's not nearly as embarrassing for Harry this time because Cho doesn't show up to witness it, which, as a reminder, neither Harry nor Cho have a crush on each other this time around, since Cedric is still alive, so he's just still dating Cho, and also Harry really never developed a crush on Cho to begin with, since he didn't play Quidditch against her in their third year. But don't forget, Ron still did. But all that really happens as a result of the stink sap is that Harry's kind of annoyed at that Longbottom fellow.
Why is it always me?
Then they arrive at school, where normally Harry sees the Thestrals for the first time because he witnessed Cedric die. Although actually, if you read the book carefully, it says that Harry specifically had his eyes closed at that exact moment, so damn, whatever. But again, Cedric's alive, so Harry can't see the Thestrals.
It's pulling itself like always.
Which isn't a huge deal. It just sort of helps Harry confirm that Luna isn't quite as loony as she seems later on once he figures out what the Thestrals are. So he doesn't have that early moment of connection with her. Then we get to the opening feast, where suddenly Draco confronts Harry and asks him, "Did you tell my father I could produce a Patronus?" And Harry confirms that he did, which Draco is clearly perturbed by, although Harry cannot fathom why. The real reason is that Draco was purposely concealing this information from Lucius, knowing that he wouldn't approve of his son knowing such powerful good magic, if you will. The weird thing, though, is that when Lucius learned about it, he wasn't even upset. He actually considers it good cover because he obviously expects Draco to just follow in his footsteps. So really, Draco's upset with Harry because concealing this knowledge felt good. It's like he was secretly subverting his father, but now he's not, so he's mad at Harry for telling his dad that he sort of agrees with Harry, even though his dad interpreted the information as a good thing anyway. I know that sounds confusing and like a lot to feel, but teenagers, am I right? Meanwhile, the Sorting Hat gives its warning and suggests that all the houses unite like they're supposed to be, which normally Harry is sort of scoffing at because he hates the Slytherin so much, but this time he's in Slytherin, and it feels a lot more feasible because his two best friends are already in Gryffindor. Actually, even in the main story, Hermione is pretty immediately open to the idea of building bridges with Slytherin House, which Harry remains really grateful for in this version of events because, like Dumbledore predicted, much of Slytherin House seems to have turned cold against him. Then Umbridge stands up to give her really boring speech about how progress for progress's sake must be avoided at all costs, blah blah. Oh my god, I'm bored. Normally Hermione's there to decipher this entire speech to Harry, but of course she's sitting at the Gryffindor table, so she can't. Although almost on that exact same note, Harry's first class with Umbridge actually goes a little bit better since he's with the Slytherins this time instead of the Gryffindors. Because if you will recall, it's actually Hermione who has her hand raised for 10 minutes before eventually instigating the big argument that ends with Harry shouting at Umbridge that Lord Voldemort is back and getting him a week's worth of detention.
Detention, Mr. Potter!
Meaning Harry actually avoids detention that whole first week, but he still does learn how that conversation goes from the Gryffindors, where the class went about the same. And by the same, I mean mostly Ron just steps in to fill Harry's role. In Harry's absence, Ron is the one who speaks up and informs Umbridge that Voldemort is back and that Harry is telling the truth. And it's actually Ron who has a week's worth of detention right out of the gate with Umbridge. Unlike Harry, though, Ron pretty immediately tells Hermione and Harry what detention is like and that he's having to write "I must not tell lies" into the back of his hand. Harry, for his part, is appalled by this information and brings it up with Umbridge in his very next defense against the dark arts class, which then does in fact result in him getting a week's worth of detention himself. So good job, Harry.
Detention, Mr. Potter!
But because Ron has detention that first week, it means he misses the Gryffindor Quidditch team tryouts. So he misses his sister, Ginny, trying out for the team. And guess what? She makes it as Seeker? Ron is, of course, horribly irritated by this. He has been the Gryffindor Seeker for the past 3 years. His hand hurts terribly, and now he's lost his spot on the Quidditch team to his little sister. However, Angelina, who was the Gryffindor Quidditch captain that year, confronts Ron and tells him, "Look, Ron, the fact is, Ginny was just great at Seeker and really has the build for it. You're not as small as you once were, but with Wood gone, we still need to keep her. You might not have the Seeker's build anymore, but you're about as perfect for a keeper as anyone could be, and I know from years of playing with you that you're a great flyer. If you want the job, it's yours." And Ron unwittingly accepts. Keeper. Ron, can you imagine? Harry's first week as Quidditch captain goes okay. Typically, this is the year where Crabbe and Goyle join the team, but obviously that doesn't happen this time because Harry is not going to accept any Death Eater offspring on his Quidditch team, except for Malfoy, who's already on the team. In fact, on that note, Draco is the one Harry leaves in charge when he himself has detention with Dolores the following week. Draco, of course, is the next highest seniority on the team, and Harry thinks of it as something of a peace offering for telling Lucius about Draco's Patronus. And Draco, for his part, recognizes the peace offering, and in return reveals that his dad recognized the dog who was with them at the platform when they left for school, wink, wink. Also, for what it's worth, I know you're wondering, Draco does now finally have another brand new broomstick, a Nimbus 2001. With Voldemort returning, Lucius has dropped a lot of the general pettiness towards his son, who he now has much larger goals for, including him eventually becoming a Death Eater, but he's still not gonna shell out the galleons for another firebolt. I mean, these things don't grow on trees. Well, the next big event is when Sirius is checking in on Harry via the fireplace in the common room, trying to respond to Harry's letter about his scar hurting and wondering where Hagrid is, who of course is off looking for giants. The main difference is obviously that happens in the Slytherin common room this time. Sirius still suggests that he try and meet up with him and Ron and Hermione at Hogsmeade, but after what Draco told him about Lucius recognizing Snuffles at the platform and the Daily Prophet saying that a recently spotted Sirius Black in London, Harry vehemently shuts this down. The following day, Educational Decree number 23 is passed and makes Dolores Umbridge the High Inquisitor, and she starts inspecting all the teachers, although Harry is not actually present for the Trelawney or McGonagall inspection this time because he's in Slytherin. But this is also what finally prompts Hermione to suggest to Harry that he be the one to teach everyone defense against the dark arts.
And if Umbridge refuses to teach us how, we need someone who will.
Which, as usual, Harry gives some thought, but then immediately decides, yes, let's do it! I actually think he was just sort of walking down the hall and just sort of came to that conclusion. The first meeting the Hogs had goes pretty much the same, but with a few key differences. For one, Cedric is still alive, and thus Cedric shows up. Along with him, of course, is Cho, who is still his girlfriend, but who would really obviously rather be doing just about anything else on their first trip to Hogsmeade. Like, say, for example, hitting up Madame Puttyfoots for a hot cup of gray coffee. Yeah. In the main story, Cho is actually extremely interested in the DA and very motivated to go, and she is the one who's having to drag her friend Marietta Edgecombe with her. This time, however, she's definitely just attending because Cedric wants to go, so Marietta doesn't come at all. And you might think less people would show up overall because it seems like less people are believing Harry's version of events this year, but by now, a lot of the students are really starting to hate Umbridge, and Cedric's vote of confidence in him in particular seems to be spurring people on. As ever in this first meeting, Harry finally starts to get some credit for all the crazy things he has accomplished in his first 4 years at Hogwarts as he answers questions people are asking. Cedric himself even confirms the rumors that Harry talked down a basilisk during his second year, having seen Harry control the basilisk under the lake just last year during the second task. And Ron, for his part, is just super unimpressed with Cedric's presence at this meeting. I was in that lake too, you know. I helped. Actually, speaking of the lake though, in the last video, I asked you guys for fan art of Harry riding the basilisk in the lake, and oh my gosh, wow, did you deliver? Just look at, these are, they are amazing. I love them. I love them. Thank you all so much to anyone who submitted these. I've been enjoying looking at them all week. Interestingly though, even though Harry is in Slytherin this year, he is still the only Slytherin at this meeting. And this is something Harry actually points out at this meeting, reminding everyone that the real reason he's the only Slytherin here is that the rest of the Slytherins are probably just afraid of either their parents or Voldemort. And at these words, Hermione catches Harry's eye and smiles before quickly ushering everyone up to the front to sign her secretly cursed contract. The formation of this club, of course, prompts Umbridge to pass Educational Decree number 24, which bans clubs that aren't approved by her. Normally, this law forces the existence of the Gryffindor Quidditch team to be in jeopardy, but since this law is basically passed and aimed 100% at Harry, it is actually the Slytherin team who's in jeopardy this time. Which I have to say, this is just a stupid move by Umbridge. Usually she can lean on Slytherin House for a little bit more support, since so many of the students there recognize that everyone thinking Harry's crazy is beneficial to Voldemort. But as ever with tyrants, people are drawn to them because they themselves want power. But as quickly as tyrants will turn on their people, people will turn on them. And sure enough, the Slytherins do not take kindly to this less than special treatment that they are accustomed to, even though they are eventually cleared to play. In the meantime, Harry gets another note from Sirius about having another conversation in the Slytherin common room fireplace. But this is the owl that Umbridge actually intercepts and reads, so she's sort of waiting for it. Before Umbridge steps in though, Sirius, as usual, is just pleased as punch that Harry is forming this secret defense against the Dark Arts Club and causing all sorts of ruckus. And while he helps Harry brainstorm a place to have the meetings, before they land on anything, Umbridge cuts in and Sirius has to flee. Turns out though, this conversation wasn't nearly as private as Harry thought it was going to be. Not only was Umbridge waiting for it to happen, but after Sirius leaves, Draco emerges and reveals he overheard the entire thing. And whilst Harry immediately panics, unsure what this means, is Draco going to tell his father about this?
You wait till my father hears about this.
He quickly breathes a sigh of relief as Draco actually has come with a suggestion as somewhere Harry can host the meetings for this defense group. A place he and Harry know all too well. The Chamber of Secrets. And it really is perfect. Harry, Ron, and Draco are really the only ones who even know where the entrance is, and Harry is the only one with the power to unlock the 2 series of parcel mouth lock doors that get you into the chamber. Honestly, even in the main story, it used to bother me, like, why didn't they just go down there? Harry knows about it, but I guess the real problem is that they wouldn't have a way to get all the students back out afterwards because it's so far underground. However, that is not an issue this time because Harry has a very obvious way of ferrying everyone back up to the castle after the meetings. All everyone has to do is hold on tight to the back of the basilisk, which can easily carry the entire group all the way back up to the castle after each meeting. God, I love that the basilisk is alive. The DA meetings themselves go pretty well. They all still formally vote to have Harry be the official leader and give him some authority, even though some of the Hufflepuffs, Zachariah Smith, argue that Cedric should lead them too. After all, he was also a school champion. Honestly, I'm not even sure why they had to vote, as if Harry needs any official authority when he can control the giant freaking snake in the room. But whatever, Zachariah Smith, you do you, man. Cedric, for his part, shuts this down and votes for Harry himself. But once the training starts, it's pretty obvious why Cedric was the other school champion, as he is high and away the best student Harry has. That said, they start things off like usual by practicing Expelliarmus. Cedric pairs with Cho and Ron with Hermione. But Harry notices that Cedric is really kind of refusing to try against his girlfriend and suggests that he trades places with Hermione. And while this is genuinely a good teaching maneuver so that all the students are properly motivated, it's also a little bit of Harry's playing wingman for Ron, if you will, as it does then give Ron the opportunity to beat Cedric in front of Cho, and it actually is really motivating for Ron. On the other hand, it is straight up discouraging for Cho, who is simply no match for Hermione and has a very lousy lesson and an overall bad time. And after all, I mean, she's really just there to spend time with Cedric anyway. Harry himself actually makes this matter worse by going on to congratulate Hermione on her absolutely perfect spell work. Well, that brings us to the first Quidditch match of the year, Gryffindor versus Slytherin. Typically, the build-up for this matchup is huge since Quidditch has been off for a year and since the Gryffindors and Slytherins hate each other so much. But with Harry as a captain, there isn't this like whole prolonged smear campaign by the Slytherins leading up to the match, and there's also no like Weasley is our king badges or song. It's also Ron's first go as keeper, a position he was initially sort of reluctant to take, but is finding he's actually kind of good at. Really, what we have here is a Ron who is being highly motivated by his progress in the DA. He's riding a Nimbus 2000, and he didn't suffer this entire smear campaign by the Slytherins, and he actually makes a really good showing. In fact, let's be real, the Gryffindors are otherwise stacked this year. They have Angelina, Alicia, Katie, Ron, Fred, and George all of whom are upperclassmen and who have been flying together for like 4 years now. Meanwhile, Harry's limited pool of candidates for players on Quidditch that don't include parents who are Death Eaters or Voldemort supporters has left him with a very young, less experienced team. As such, the match begins and Gryffindor is easily able to run up the score. It is quickly 150-0. Ron is on fire. Draco has the quaffle, but Ginny sees the snitch. So does Harry. The race is on. Draco zooms for goal. He dodges one bludger from Fred. Harry is level with Ginny. Draco dodges another bludger from George. Harry's ahead of Ginny. He reaches out. Draco shoots. Ron blocks it. Harry catches the snitch. It's a tie! Whew. Wow, what a game. Even I was on the edge of my seat. I made it up. Ron saves a narrow loss, remains technically undefeated to Harry, and is by all means, at least to the Gryffindors, a king. Now, normally after this match, Draco successfully taunts Harry, Fred, and George into physically attacking him, which results in the three of them being banned from Quidditch forever. I don't see how that would possibly carry on after school. But obviously, that just doesn't happen this time, so neither Harry or Fred or George get this permanent ban. At least not yet. You know Umbridge is looking. Later that night, Hagrid finally returns from his mission to go see the Giants, but Harry, Ron, and Hermione don't go visit him on that night because it's Hermione who notices Hagrid is back from the Gryffindor common room, and obviously Harry's down in the Slytherin common room, and they have no way to go get him. So they don't actually see Hagrid until the next morning at breakfast, meaning they miss Umbridge's initial interrogation of Hagrid, but it might go a little bit better, honestly, since she doesn't see their 3 sets of footprints leading up to his hut. Either way, though, all it prompts the trio to do is to warn Hagrid not to show them monsters, which is advice he doesn't take anyway. And actually, in the very next class, he shows them Thestrals. This lesson is obviously way different for Harry this time, since obviously he can't see the Thestrals. Instead, it's just Neville and some other mysterious, unnamed 5th-year Slytherin boy, although presumably Harry actually knows his name this time around, since they obviously are sharing a dorm. Personally, I like to think of him as Pete. Pete's really not so bad. Keeps to himself, mostly. He's haunted by witnessing the death of his something. Nonetheless, it's still a good lesson where Harry learns how Thestrals work and that they have an insanely good sense of navigation. But that brings us to the last DA meeting before Christmas, where usually Harry and Cho kiss for the first time, but obviously this time they don't. But don't y'all worry, I can tell you're hungry for some sweet, sweet, wet action. Harry's words, not mine.
Well, how was it? Wet.
Well, I have some good news for you as Harry is bidding everyone farewell, congratulating them on a semester well done, passing out high fives and hugs all around. Hermione rushes up to him and gives him a hug as well, says, "Great job this semester, Harry," and gives him a swift kiss on the cheek. Harry, of course, has no idea what to make of that. Was it friendly, fleeting, congratulatory, nothing? Something. Mostly he assumes friendly, not that he has much time to think about it though, because oh my gosh, he's asleep. He's the snake, he can see Mr. Weasley. He attacks! And this is a big difference maker. Normally he's in Gryffindor Tower and immediately wakes up in a panic, which wakes everybody else up, and he starts screaming that he needs to go save Mr. Weasley. But this time he's in the Slytherin common room, meaning when he wakes up in a panic, he actually wakes up Draco, Crabbe, Goyle, Blaze the Beanie, and that other dude, Pete, who can see Thestrals. He's in such a panic that nobody really knows what to do, but Draco at least goes and fetches Snape, who immediately informs Dumbledore and McGonagall about what's happening and rushes Harry up to the headmaster's office, where the rest of the Weasley children have been assembled as well, and they all portkey out. The main difference here is that while Crabbe and Goyle are definitely too thick to understand what was happening in the moment, they're definitely going to go home and tell their parents about this incident, who are then immediately going to tell Voldemort what happened, who can then immediately put the pieces together and realize, oh my gosh, I have a link into Harry Potter's mind. He actually sort of figures this out on his own anyway, but now he has really, really concrete evidence as to what happened. Once at Grimmauld Place, Harry starts to worry that he has a snake inside of him, and is reminded of his second year where he thought he was the heir of Slytherin and was attacking people. But you weren't attacking people. It was Voldemort, he tells himself. But the basilisk listened to you, not him, didn't it? He argues back to himself. Ever since Harry's second year, he's been extremely proud to be in Slytherin, feeling like he is what truly represents a Slytherin, not power-hungry, murderous Voldemort. But now, feeling like he was inside the snake's head, he's starting to second guess himself. Is this what it means to be a true Slytherin? He wonders, to be a terrible snake? He wonders if he's on the same path as Voldemort. After all, wasn't Tom Riddle, a star pupil in Slytherin House who won them lots of points and championships before going to the dark side? Is he somehow walking the same path? Certainly a lot to think about. But next up is St. Mungo's and everyone's favorite, the Janus Thicky Ward. If you know, you know. St. Mungo's is about the same as always. Arthur tries to fix himself with Muggle stitches, Gilderoy Lockhart is as loopy as his handwriting, and they run into Neville and meet his parents and learn about Bellatrix. Oh, and they overhear Mad Eye talking about how Harry is being possessed by Voldemort, which is, you know, continuing to freak Harry out. Although it does alleviate some of his concerns about it being related to him being in Slytherin. Either way, though, it doesn't last long, as Ginny eventually just clears up what it's actually like being possessed by Voldemort. Don't forget that even though Draco was the one taken into the chamber, Ginny still had the diary for a while in Harry's second year. This leaves the group to enjoy the rest of the holidays pretty nicely until the very last day when Harry finds out that he's going to be getting Occlumency lessons from Snape, which actually isn't nearly as bad for Harry this go round, since his and Snape's relationship isn't as strained as usual, since Harry is such a star pupil for Slytherin House. Which is not to say Snape and Sirius' relationship is any better at all. They still absolutely hate each other and still have a very loud argument about this topic before Harry sets off. Harry's first Occlumency lesson is his very first night back at Hogwarts, the same day he does not ask Cho out to Valentine's Day this year. And I suppose the lesson is a little bit more constructive than usual since Snape's not so mean to Harry all the time. But really, Harry is just terrible at Occlumency like hard stop, so it's not that much better. Turns out it's an eventful 2 days back though, as the very next morning is also when 10 Death Eaters break out of Azkaban. And while this swells Voldemort's ranks, it also swells the number of people who are believing Harry's version of events, since so many people are afraid of these Death Eaters who've escaped. It also prompts the passing of Educational Decree number 25, which stops the teachers from telling their students about anything not related to their subjects. The DA meetings pick up again, and as usual, Neville progresses really fast, being highly motivated by Bellatrix's escape. In fact, in almost no time flat, he's able to successfully face off against Cedric. What? And between Ron's determination to impress Cho by defeating Cedric and Neville's sudden improvement, Cedric himself finds himself really motivated and committed to the DA. Not that he needs much more motivation, as he was tortured in the maze last year by one of the Death Eaters, well, like by the transitive property. But as often happens in groups like this, the competitive nature of it all is just really spurring him on. Cho, meanwhile, is feeling more ignored and less enthused than ever, especially as her parents lean more and more on the Ministry, the more and more bad things happen. Speaking of whom, though, Harry's Valentine's Day trip to Hogsmeade is much different than usual. Rather than not enjoying his very not tasty, very not Carlin Brothers coffee, available at carlinbrotherscoffee.com, the best way to feel alive in the morning and not dead, he instead gets to spend the whole day with Hermione. Ron, of course, has Quidditch practice. Normally, this is when Harry does the interview with Rita Skeeter for the Quibbler, because Hermione blackmails her into it. And I actually think they still do the interview. Hermione just has to switch up her tactics to make it happen. Because if you will recall, in Goblet of Fire, Rita actually starts out writing about Harry in this very tragic, kind of supportive way, even though it's like highly inaccurate and still causes Harry a lot of anguish. But then later, Hermione points out that the readers are getting bored of seeing Harry as this tragic hero, and instead she switched tactics and starts attacking Harry. Same thing is happening this time, except it's time for the pendulum to swing back in the other direction again. Because at this point, it's going to have been like 9 months of bashing Harry in the Prophet. The only difference is the Prophet actually won't let her switch angles. But with the escape of 10 Death Eaters and public opinion swaying, Hermione is able to lure Rita in with the promise of an exclusive interview with Harry Potter for the Quibbler. I mean, you gotta fight fire with fire, right? I do suppose they have to pay Rita for her work this time, since she's not being blackmailed into doing it, but I think Harry's okay with paying her. He's got lots of money. Right? As ever, though, this issue of the Quibbler is an absolute hit and forces the passing of Educational Decree number 27, which just says you can't read the Quibbler. Seems oddly specific. This, of course, makes the Quibbler a truly hot commodity around the school, but I do think this finally costs Harry his captainship of the Slytherin Quidditch team, something Dolores has been trying to take from him all year, and now she can. Which means Draco takes over as captain for the rest of the year. Speaking of whom, though, Draco is having kind of a mixed reaction to this article in the Quibbler, in which Harry named his father as a Death Eater. Draco, of course, already knew this, but people are not treating him well because of the article, which, of course, is really hard for him because he doesn't really agree with his father very much at this point, but is also not in a position where he's willing to openly speak out against him. So, like, What to do? Moving on though, next up, Trelawney is still fired and Terenzi is still hired. And the DA is at last discovered by Umbridge. Now, typically it's Marietta Edgecombe who blabs to Umbridge, but this time, and I'm sure you saw it coming, it was Cho, which is actually what also happens in the movies, oddly. Dobby is able to still give the DA a bit of a head start in getting people out of the Chamber of Secrets. And now they've been navigating the pipes long enough that they know other bathrooms they can exit from. So for the most part, everyone gets away, but Harry himself actually still gets caught by none other than Draco. As ever, Harry is brought up to Dumbledore's office where Dumbledore tries to defend Harry, but is ultimately forced to flee Hogwarts, and Umbridge becomes headmistress. Ugh. The next day, the Inquisitorial Squad is officially introduced to the school, and to Harry's surprise, Draco is a part of it. However, he pulls Harry aside and explains, "Sorry about last night. I didn't really know what we were looking for. She came round last night looking for students to help and seemed to think anyone's family mentioned in your article would oblige to help her take you down, and she was right. Everyone and some others agreed. I had no choice but to go along." Harry listens to this apology, but is still pretty upset that Dumbledore has been forced out of the school and is unsure whether this is trustworthy or another trick. In the meantime, though, it is time for Fred and George to begin phase 1 of their plan of exiting the school. They light off their huge bag of fireworks and manage to dodge the Inquisitorial Squad themselves by shoving one of their members, Montague, into a vanishing cabinet. Now, if you remember back in part 2 of this series, this is the very vanishing cabinet that Nearly Headless Nick failed to convince Peeves to smash. In the main story, the smashed cabinet keeps Montague in limbo for weeks, but this time it's not smashed, so really he should just pass directly through to Borgin and Burke's, where I'm sure he arrives very confused. That said though, the eventual return of Montague is what Draco usually interrupts one of Harry and Snape's Occlumency lessons with, like Snape has to go tend to Montague who finally showed up, and that's when Harry is left alone with Snape's thoughts. So actually that won't happen this time. Harry won't go in the pensive and see the Marauders torment Snape, which then also means Harry doesn't stop getting Occlumency lessons with Snape and doesn't break into Umbridge's office to have an overly urgent conversation with Sirius and Lupin about what a jerk James was in school. Instead, Harry is just present to see Fred and George's grand escape after they set up a swamp in one of the upper corridors and leave with a blaze of glory, although they don't have to summon their brooms from Umbridge's office this time because they never got the Quidditch band, but they definitely still fly off in a blaze of glory. But okay, so then if Harry doesn't stop taking Occlumency lessons, does that mean he successfully blocks Voldemort out and isn't lured into the Ministry later on? Absolutely not. As we mentioned earlier, despite Harry giving the several months solid effort, he is never very good at Occlumency, which is surprising because Harry is like innately good at basically every other kind of defensive magic. He throws off the Imperius Curse on his first try, but he can't do this. In part because I think he actually kind of wanted to know what Voldemort was looking for. The aftermath of Fred and George leaving though was pretty much the same. The students began causing chaos everywhere, especially Peeves. They began upending tables, bursting out of blackboards and toppling statues and vases, smashing lanterns, snuffed out candles, juggling burning torches over the heads of screaming students, caused neatly stacked piles of parchments to topple into fires or out of windows, flooded the second floor when he pulled off all the taps in the bathrooms, dropped a bag of tarantulas in the middle of the Great Hall during breakfast, and, whenever he fancied a break, spent hours at a time floating along after Umbridge and blowing loud raspberries every time she spoke. And I have to say, I think somewhere in the midst of all that chaos, he does still break the vanishing cabinet. Next up, Hagrid takes Harry and Hermione to go see Groff off in the woods, meaning they still miss Ron's final Quidditch match of the year. But it has to be said, without Harry playing for Slytherin and with basically the entire Gryffindor squad active the entire time, Gryffindor has been on a tear. Which is, I guess, just to say they also beat Hufflepuff, who would have still had Cedric as Seeker. But seriously, they do all this training week in and week out. They play 3 games a year. Like, each team should play the other teams at least twice, minimum, like probably 3 times. Like, even then, 9 games is still not a lot of games. Either way, despite the twins' recent departure, Ravenclaw is still just no match for Gryffindor. Cho herself doesn't even play as she's so embarrassed to be seen in front of the entire school with the word sneak written across her face from the cursed parchment. Plus, after Cedric found out that she was the one to tell Umbridge about the DA, he ended things with her. Honestly, this version of the story does not go nearly as well for Cho. I mean, although I guess last time her boyfriend died, so maybe she's just destined for sadness. Anyway, Gryffindor wins the Quidditch Cup. Good for you, Ron. Way to go. Who, in case you're wondering, also has kind of turned cold on the whole Cho train after finding out about the Umbridge reveal. Not that Cho was ever really reciprocating feelings for him or anything, but next up for the 5th years is their OWL exams, which pretty much go the exact same for Harry. Being in Slytherin hasn't really affected his performance in classes that much. Although it has affected Draco, who also gets an outstanding in defense against the dark arts by, like Harry, producing a Patronus. Harry actually managed to watch some of Draco's exam though, and was impressed by some of the other defensive spells he was able to perform as well though. During Harry's astronomy exam is when Umbridge goes to fire Hagrid and McGonagall shows up and gets stunned by 4 stunners at once. And I think Harry still ends up seeing this because even in the main story, Ernie Macmillan is present at the top of the tower. So it sounds like all the 5th years just have this exam at the same time. I mean, I know Pete was there, that's for sure. Which brings us to our final OWL, where Harry falls asleep in the middle of his History of Magic exam. And oh my gosh, this is where he has the crazy vision about Voldemort torturing Sirius in the Department of Mysteries. Feels like we need some smoke for that. Oh yeah. Spooky. The difference here is that when he wakes up, his normal first thought is to tell McGonagall, which of course he can't because she's stunned, and then he also can't tell Dumbledore or Hagrid because they've been removed from the school. Typically, he just completely forgets that Snape is also in the Order, but being in Slytherin House and having not had any of his Occlumency lessons canceled, I think he does remember Snape is in the Order this time. So Harry is actually able to tell Snape just right away about the vision he saw. However, Snape immediately scolds him for not employing any of the occlumency they've been practicing. He tells Harry he should not have seen that at all, demands Harry stay at the school, and that definitely the Dark Lord and Sirius Black, the 2 most wanted wizards in the world, are not at the Ministry of Magic in the middle of the day. To be fair, Snape is also working for Voldemort at this point as a double agent, so he might also just absolutely know this is a trap, but is unaware of how Harry is going to take this information. Harry, as you might expect, doesn't take any of Snape's advice to heart at all. He's completely aware of the absolute hatred between Snape and Sirius, and he just doesn't agree with Snape's assessment of the situation, especially after he accurately told everyone that Mr. Weasley was attacked during Christmas. And from Harry's perspective, Snape might not even care if Sirius dies. Therefore, as ever, he disregards Snape's advice and rounds up Ron and Hermione and starts devising how they're going to get to the Ministry. Hermione, though, as ever the clear head, persuades Harry to try and check if Sirius is at headquarters by using Umbridge's fireplace. Harry agrees and immediately races down to the Slytherin common room to retrieve his invisibility cloak to pull off the plan, while Ron and Hermione look for other DA members who might be able to help them. They find Ginny and Luna. Harry successfully breaks into Umbridge's office and is able to talk to Kreacher at Grimmauld Place, who immediately confirms Harry's worst fear just before he is pulled back out of the fireplace by Umbridge. This is where things are starting to look pretty bad for Harry, as the Inquisitorial squad, including Draco, have rounded up all of Harry's friends. The change here is that instead of Neville, it's actually Cedric who stepped in and tried to help out, and for his part, he actually took down a couple of Inquisitorial squad members before they simply outnumbered him. Umbridge then sends one of the squad members to go and fetch Snape so she can try and force Harry to take Veritaserum, but for some reason they cannot find him. And therefore, Umbridge decides to take things into her own hands and reasons herself into using the Cruciatus Curse on Harry. The entire room stares as Umbridge lowers her wand at Harry, who is helpless to fight back. She's about to cast the spell, and then, Stupefy! Draco stuns Umbridge in the back and quickly tosses Harry his wand. The other members of the Inquisitorial squad are so shocked that they react a second too late, and in that time, Harry manages to stun 2 more. Draco, in the meantime, is able to cast a shield charm to protect Harry from incoming spells from the other members. But that's all it takes. In the rest of the confusion, the DA are able to break free and overwhelm the rest of the Inquisitorial squad. You'll have to stun me too, says Draco. I'll talk my way out of it. Say Weasley got a hold of my wand and stunned Umbridge, not me. And with that, a moment of understanding passes between Draco and Harry, who then stuns Draco. Gently, I like to think. Harry, Ron, Hermione, Cedric, Ginny, and Luna then flee the castle onto the grounds, where Harry fills everyone else in on the situation. How do we get to the Ministry now, says Ron. Brooms, suggests Cedric. But we don't have time to go get them. I should have grabbed mine while we were in Umbridge's office, Harry says. We can summon them, Cedric assures him. It doesn't matter if it's chained up. If the spell is strong enough, they'll come. Then, acting on pure adrenaline and instinct, Harry raises his wand and shouts, Accio Firebolt! Which, sure enough, comes crashing out of Umbridge's office, chain and all. Ginny, Ron, and Cedric then follow suit, summoning their own brooms, but Luna and Hermione don't have brooms. Not to worry, says Luna as she makes a weird shrieking sound into the forest, as, Luna does. This summons a Thestral to her side, which she informs Hermione they can ride to the Ministry. Hermione begins to protest, but Luna interrupts. They have a very excellent sense of direction, They can show us the way. Brilliant, says Harry. And with that, they take to the sky with Hermione hanging on to Luna for dear life and everyone else following what appears to be just a flying Luna Lovegood who, it has to be said, looks perfectly at ease. Once at the Ministry, the group quickly finds its way down to the Department of Mystery and makes several bad guesses at the doors, finding the time room, the brain room, the space room, and the death chamber before eventually finding the Hall of Prophecy. Once in the hall, Harry quickly races to where he knows Sirius is supposed to be, except he's not there. Ron notices Harry's prophecy on the shelf. Harry reaches out and grabs it. Avada Kedavra! A shrill voice cuts through the air and a jet of green light flashes around them. Harry turns around. No! Cedric! But it's too late. Cedric falls to the ground. Dead. Now hand that over to me, Potter, says the drawling voice of Lucius Malfoy, stepping out of the shadows, wand still drawn. Harry is in shock. He's hardly able to take in the situation, but comprehension is dawning on him. Sirius was not here. Voldemort had tricked him. Whatever this thing was he was holding is what he wanted. But whatever it was, he didn't care. Cedric was dead, and he couldn't let anyone else be harmed on this mission. Harry steps forward, intent on handing over the orb before anyone else gets hurt, but before he's even made a move, spells erupt in every direction around him. Ron, Hermione, Ginny, and Luna had all cast spells simultaneously. They weren't going down without a fight. Several Death Eaters immediately crumpled, while others raised their hands to protect their heads from falling glass orbs on every side. Run! Yells Harry as they all rush back to the big circular room. We have to stick together, he yells. Just pick a door with the X. We know one of them's the exit. But of course, they choose wrong and instead enter the Death Chamber, the veil looming on the dais. Unable to exit with the Death Eaters hot on the trail, Harry instructs everyone to spread out, get ready to fight. They do. As the Death Eaters catch up, they're able to bottleneck a few at the door, but eventually their numbers overwhelm them. And soon, Dumbledore's army finds itself overpowered until it's just Harry left, Lucius Malfoy bearing down on him. Harry has nothing left except thoughts of Cedric dying in front of him. And then...
Get away from my godson.
And from here, I think you pretty much know the drill. The order arrives and the fight is on. Turns out nobody could find Snape earlier because he was in fact investigating Harry's claims. Spells are flying in every direction and the day seems won until Bellatrix lands a stunning spell on Sirius, who tumbles backwards and through the veil. Dead. Harry, of course, pursues her to the entrance, where he then encounters Voldemort, who duels with Dumbledore, who manages to fend him off. This happens almost simultaneously with Fudge arriving for work, presumably to head up to his office to heat his morning fudge when he sees Voldemort. He's back! But in the aftermath of the battle, things go down pretty much as usual. Dumbledore tells Harry about the prophecy and how Voldemort believes he is the chosen one. But the end of the year feast is a lot different, as now everyone knows for sure that Voldemort is back, and that one of his Death Eaters, Draco's father specifically, killed Cedric Diggory. Draco can hardly show his face around the school, which Harry feels is kind of unfair, as only he, Ron, Hermione, Ginny, and Luna actually know how much Draco helped them. But in honor of Cedric's death, Dumbledore does award the House Cup to Hufflepuff, finally ending Slytherin's long win streak. And then the Second War begins. Okay, so as per always, our story begins in Spinner's End, where Bellatrix and Narcissa have arrived at Snape's home. And as usual, Narcissa is terrified because her son Draco has been given the task of killing Albus Dumbledore as punishment for Lucius's total blunder at the Ministry just months ago. And on the whole, this pretty much plays out the same. The prophecy was still unrecovered, and if anything, Lucius made an even bigger mess of things by also killing Cedric Diggory this time. Which, on that note, I've gotten this question a lot. Why would Lucius kill Cedric? Is he really that trigger happy? And the answer is because Cedric is the only 7th year student there, a highly recognizable Triwizard champion, and the only one who the Death Eaters might have seen as a threat. Plus, instantly killing him really sets the tone for just how serious they're being. As such, Narcissa still asks Snape to enter an unbreakable vow with her to help Draco in his task, and Snape, as ever, agrees to shut Bellatrix up, because she is being so annoying. The obvious big change in this situation though is where Draco's heart lies. If you recall, last we saw him, he was stunning Dolores Umbridge in her office to help out Dumbledore's army. But outside of the DA, none of the Death Eaters are aware that Draco helped them. So Draco, along with his parents' lives, are still on the line contingent upon Draco completing this task, which of course is still to kill Dumbledore. And you might be thinking, wait a minute, isn't Voldemort like a super good Legilimens? Wouldn't he be able to detect Draco's true allegiance? And while that's true, the answer is an almost unsurprising no. For two reasons. First, one of the cool things we actually learn about Draco in this year is that he, unlike Harry, is actually really talented at Occlumency. Admittedly, probably not good enough to totally throw off Voldemort if Voldemort was like really trying, but this is gonna be another example of where Voldemort's arrogance is his absolute downfall. Because here's the thing. Voldemort would never see Draco as a threat at all. It's the same way he doesn't see house elves as a threat. Like Draco is just so young as to otherwise be a non-entity. In fact, this is exactly like how it doesn't count when Harry gets in the boat in the cave to get the Horcrux later. Like Voldemort just doesn't think that registers. Plus, on top of that, it's all just punishment anyway. It's not like he expects him to succeed. It's not even a real job. All that really just to say that yes, Draco is indeed still tasked with killing Dumbledore. But he is on much better terms with Harry, so that should make for a much more interesting year. Speaking of Harry though, he is again at the Dursleys, which as usual in this retelling of things has almost no bearing on anything. So once again, Harry is just laying there waiting for the arrival of Albus Dumbledore, who does indeed arrive and does still use the mead to clink the Dursleys on the head. I think that's hilarious. That absolutely stays in. And from there, he and Harry set off on a special mission before he's gonna drop him off at the Burrow for the rest of the summer. I will say one small change, I couldn't tell you why this happened when Harry was in Slytherin, but the Dursleys' Agapanthas look just like total garbage. I mean, that's just how it is. After retrieving Harry though, Dumbledore and him set off to go recruit one of his old teachers, Professor Slughorn. And as they walk towards Slughorn's hiding spot, they discuss the brand new minister, which is of course still Rufus Scrimgeour. And Harry asks Dumbledore about his now blackened hand, which as usual, he doesn't tell Harry anything about. But the main difference, and this is kind of a big one, is that Dumbledore is not wearing the ring in this situation. And that's because in this version of things, he has not yet destroyed the ring, which is because, if you recall, way back in chapter 2 of this series, Harry never pulled the sword of Gryffindor out of the hat and then subsequently impregnated it with basilisk venom, which is a really interesting problem for this particular version of events, because if you recall in the main story, like next year, the sword is super useful in destroying Horcruxes. But it also means that throughout the school year, Dumbledore is going to be sitting up in his office with the undestroyed ring, and we all know how detrimental just being in proximity of a Horcrux can be over time. But back to old Horace though. Believe it or not, Harry actually has an even easier time recruiting Slughorn to return to his teaching post at Hogwarts this year because he's actually in Slughorn's old house, Slytherin, which overall is good news, but unfortunately for Dumbledore, it leaves him with not nearly as much time to read about the new knitting patterns. Either way though, Harry is super successful, and from there, he and Dumbledore head to the Burrow where Harry has some thoroughly hot soup before turning into bed. As usual, he is awoken bright and early the next morning by the sounds of Ron and Hermione barging into his room, although he's probably a little bit more taken aback at the sight of Hermione just sitting at the edge of his bed. Soon after, their OWL results come in, which are the same as usual, and this is also when Harry is usually made the Quidditch captain, but this time around he's actually been the Quidditch captain for a full year at this point. However, it turns out that in this version of events, Ron has been made the Gryffindor Quidditch captain in their 6th year, along with being a prefect. I mean, I have to say, Harry being in Slytherin really makes Ron's job of like filling Bill and Charlie's shoes like way easier. Not that any of that's expected of you, Ron. I mean, you do you, man. But that brings us back to Diagon Alley for some good old back to school shopping. And typically this trip is kind of a big deal. It's where the compass really starts pointing towards the newly imprinted dark mark on Draco's arm in Madame Malkin's robe shop, where he won't let her get anywhere near it. That said, this time around, they do still see him in the robe shop, but it doesn't turn into like a big shouting match like usual. It's just sort of like chilly. Draco obviously has to keep up appearances for his mother. But really, while they might not be like best friends forever or anything. At this point, from Harry's point of view, they are really leaning towards much closer to allies than anything else. As such, later on in the day, when Draco gives his mother the slip to head down Nocturne Alley and go to Borgin and Burke's, the Golden Trio don't have to tail him under the invisibility cloak. They just confront him directly and ask what he's doing. Draco, wait up! What was all that about in Malkin's? Where are you headed? Sorry, Potter, I don't have time to talk. I have my part to play in all of this, and I don't need you three butting in. And honestly, a little taken aback, Harry, Ron, and Hermione are confused as to why Draco helped them at the end of the last year, but now he's being so secretive. Think he's mad we got his dad chucked in Azkaban? Says Ron through a mouthful of food. Probably. Could be, but I thought he wasn't on very good terms with his father anymore, says Harry through a mouth with no food in it at all, though it has to be said, very good breath. Still, even if you're not on good terms with your parents, I don't think you want them chucked in Azkaban. I don't think even Percy would want your parents locked up, Ron, says Hermione, wisely through her still large front teeth. I'm not really sure you needed to know what was going on with everyone's mouth in that scene, but I'll tell you what, it felt relevant while we were writing it. But that brings us to the Hogwarts Express, which goes down quite differently, I have to say. I mean, the Slug Club certainly still happens with all of the same invitees. That includes Belby, Blaze, Cormac, Ginny, Neville, and Harry. Surprisingly, Belby doesn't choke on the chicken bone this time. Yeah. Lucky him. The big difference, of course, is that Harry is way less suspicious of Draco this time around. So after the Slug Club meeting, he doesn't follow Blaze back to the Slytherin compartment, doesn't hide in the luggage racks, and then doesn't get Petrificus Totalis by Draco and left for dead under the invisibility cloak with a broken nose. Which also means Tonks doesn't come along to find him and doesn't send up a Patronus messenger, so Harry doesn't notice that she has a new Patronus. Instead, Harry just returns back to his old compartment where Ron is looking chilly about not being invited to the Slug Club, but at least is making Luna laugh about something. The two of them, I guess, were just hanging out. I don't know. The feast itself goes about as usual, except of course Harry is sitting at the Slytherin table where Draco asks him how the Slug Club went. Harry says it was fine, but really just feels relieved that Draco isn't upset with him after their meeting in Nocturne Alley. But he does ask him about it again, and Draco responds very casually, "Oh, that was nothing to worry about. Just browsing some shops for my mother. She doesn't like to be seen in Nocturne Alley anymore, not since my father was locked up." Harry doesn't press the matter any further, but also doesn't think this answer adds up very much, as if that was the case, Draco easily could have just said that when they met him in the alley. Otherwise, Slughorn is introduced as the new potions master, and Snape still gets the defense against the dark arts job. The next morning, all the sixth years head down to the Great Hall to get their schedules approved by their heads of houses, and Snape informs Harry that he is truly lucked out, that he never would have accepted his EOWL into his 6-year potions class, but that Slughorn will. Ron, of course, gets the exact same news from McGonagall, and so together they head down to potions class where they obviously don't have the books, so Slughorn still has to loan them out copies of advanced potion making. And as usual, Harry ends up with the Half-Blood Prince's copy of the book. Class itself, of course, proceeds as usual, except that when Harry smells the Amortentia, he smells treacle tart, the woody handle of a broomstick, and old parchment that for some reason reminds him of the library? Either way, Slughorn offers Felix Felicis as the prize for the day, and Harry, as usual, wins. Harry then also has his first lesson with Snape, and honestly, it's a lot easier for us to keep track of all the students now, because if you're in the NEWT level, you just have it with everyone who's having the class. There's no weird house splitting up anymore. Which means Draco is in the class. I mean, he usually is. The big difference is that he is much more motivated to learn about Defense Against the Dark Arts this year. So, when the subject of Inferi crops up, as it inevitably does, Draco raises his hand and asks whether or not Fiend Fire would be effective at defeating them. And Snape confirms that while it would be effective, it might then be even more dangerous than the initial Inferi you had been facing. This is because only highly powerful defensive water charms, certain goblin-made armors, or just waiting for the fire to peter out is the only way to defeat Fiend Fire. His real advice is Snape's exact approach to shampoo, that the best course of action is just to avoid using it altogether. Snape's boggart is a shower. After this lesson is when Harry receives his first note from Dumbledore summoning to one of his private lessons. Ron reads the note over his shoulder and exclaims, "Why does he like acid pops?" Harry, of course, explains that the password to the office is always some kind of candy.
Sherbet lemon.
Harry's lesson with Dumbledore is pretty much the same, though. They're just diving into memories, which of course all happened way before this story started, so they're all the exact same. This one in particular, though, in case you're wondering, is when they visit the Gaunt family shack and Morphin is accused of attacking Tom Riddle. The only real difference this time around is that Harry notices that maybe Dumbledore looks a shade paler than usual, or I don't know, maybe it was just the lighting in the room. Either way, next up is Quidditch tryouts, although obviously Harry is the Slytherin Quidditch captain this year, not Gryffindor. That's Ron. Nonetheless, everyone knows Harry is telling the truth now, and he has a huge number of people show up to tryouts, including a rogue batch of Hufflepuffs. But really, what's more concerning to Harry is who doesn't show up. Draco. Harry, of course, confronts him afterwards and asks why he wasn't at tryouts, and is surprised to learn that Draco has decided not to play this year. He explains he's too ashamed after his father killed Cedric last year and thinks it would just be better for everyone if he didn't play. Harry disagrees, but is unable to convince Draco to rejoin the team, and once again feels like he's not getting the full truth out of Draco. Ron's running of the Gryffindor team tryouts, however, are obviously a lot different this year, other than like Lavender still showing up. I mean, she's definitely still got the hots for old Ronnie this year. But since Ron's the captain, he doesn't have to worry about whether or not he beats McLaggen at tryouts for keeper. He just assigns himself the role of keeper. But we all know that's not McLaggen's only skill. We also know he's very good at catching very fast-moving small things. So after tryouts, Ron decides to go ahead and give McLaggen a chance at Seeker, making his team himself, Ginny, Katie Bell, Dean Thomas, and Peeks and Coot, along with McLaggen. Now, usually in the books during year 6, Ron is a nervous mess when it comes to playing Quidditch, but this time around he has had like years and years of experience, so his nerves aren't so much about whether or not he's going to play well, but instead have everything to do with being a good Quidditch captain, something that is made much worse by McLaggen's presence on the team. He is, after all, an older 7th year student who actually is pretty good at Quidditch. Guess we'll just have to see how it all unfolds. Not long after this, Harry is flipping through his copy of Advanced Potion Making and discovers the Levicorpus spell, which he tries out at random in the dorms, and instead of lifting Ron up into the air, lifts Draco up into the air by his ankle. Draco does not find this to be quite the laugh that Ron usually does, but Harry apologizes and asks whether or not he maybe wants to meet up in Hogsmeade later that day. Draco tensely accepts the apology, but says he's not going to Hogsmeade that day. It's just way too cold out, which Harry finds to be a very lame excuse. Now, typically this is the Hogsmeade visit where Katie Bell gets the necklace and then touches it and gets super duper cursed, but that doesn't actually happen this time. Like, yes, Draco is still working on his mission, but he's not being nearly as reckless about it. Because really, his only motivation here is to save his family. It's not really about killing Dumbledore. Like, he's not actually trying to impress Voldemort. After this, Harry has yet another private lesson with Dumbledore, this time to watch Dumbledore recruit the 11-year-old Tom Riddle from the orphanage. The memory itself is of course the same as ever, but Harry can't help but notice Dumbledore seems to have a small cough. But that leads us into our first Quidditch match of the year, Gryffindor vs Slytherin. Let's go! Usually this is the match where Harry fakes putting the Felix Felicis in Ron's pumpkin juice and like placebos him into playing amazing. However, obviously that's not going down this time. Harry's not gonna help the Gryffindor team win this match. I mean, snakes for life, right? That said, for being honest, Harry does not love his odds in this match. He knows Ron is a really good keeper and Ginny is a really good chaser, and that his own team is comparatively very young, and his best chaser decided to quit. Turns out though that McLaggen is just as big a problem for Ron as he was for Harry, and that instead of looking for the snitch, he is busy just trying to tell all the other players what to do. Ron himself is actually playing great, but at one point McLaggen is trying to show one of the beaters how to swing their bat and hits a bludger which goes way off course and hits Ron in the shoulder, breaking it. Ron howls in pain, but manages to clutch onto his broom with his unbroken arm and stay aloft. And with Ron injured, Harry's young team begins scoring much faster, although it has to be said, not with ease. Ron, who is getting paler by the minute, still manages to actually block a couple of goals simply by obstructing the hoops with his body or else kicking the quaffle. And Harry, for his part, obviously wants to win the game, but is really upset with McLaggen for taking out Ron, so he decides to try out the old Ronski feint, which to be clear is a move he saw Victor Crumb doing at the World Cup and is not named after Ron fainting, which to be fair, in this exact moment is at risk, but McLaggen buys it hook, line, and sinker. Harry dives for the unseen snitch and McLaggen follows in hot pursuit, but he's just no match for the firebolt. Harry pulls a full length ahead of McLaggen and positions himself directly in front of him, pulling him into his slipstream and obstructing his view. Harry picks up even more speed and then, less than a foot from the ground, pulls up from the dive. McLaggen, not so lucky. He hits the ground broom first before tumbling onto the ground over and over and over and over. Wow, it's like Lightning McQueen. But then with no seeker and a very injured keeper, Slytherin goes on to an easy victory. After the game, Ron performs his own version of the Ron faint and collapses out of pure pain, but wakes up in the hospital bed ready to kill McLaggen, but still thinks Harry's feint was brilliant. Slytherin's victory here actually changes a lot. Typically after this match is when Harry and Ron discover Ginny and Dean snogging up a storm in some corridor in their post-match euphoria, which ends up with Ginny and Ron having this whole screaming match where Ginny taunts Ron for never having kissed anyone and points out that Harry kissed Cho and Hermione kissed Crumb. And usually this prompts Ron to become like super upset with Hermione for like literally half the book. And then he starts also dating Lavender, not just to make Hermione jealous, but also to prove Ginny wrong. But obviously none of that happens this time. I mean, Gryffindor didn't win to begin with. Ron's in the hospital wing and doesn't even have a crush on Hermione. So as a result, Ron does not immediately start dating Lavender after this. Although I like to think she still sends him kind of an aggressive get well soon card in the hospital wing that he's a little put off by. But, and this is fun, the other thing Ron actually wakes up to is an invite to the next Slug Club party, which is a big change for Ron. I mean, typically Slughorn can't remember Ron's name like the whole book.
Good to see you, Wallenby.
But this time around, Ron is Quidditch captain, he's a prefect. Slughorn would have heard about Ron being present with Harry at the Ministry of Magic. And after watching this last match where Ron is playing with a broken shoulder, he says he's rarely witnessed such a display of bravery. On the other side of things though, Harry's team, Slytherin, did win the match. And afterwards, Hermione comes to congratulate him, saying that his Wronski feint looked just like Victor's. Which I think we can all agree there was really no call for using his first name in that situation. At these words, however, Harry feels genuine pangs of jealousy and for the first time ever lets himself consider how he might actually feel about Hermione, but he definitely doesn't go like way off the deep end with it like Ron does.
I've never really thought about it. But I suppose, yeah.
If anything, he actually tries to talk himself out of the idea over and over, not wanting to risk their friendship for anything. But that said, Slughorn's Christmas party is right around the corner and people need dates. Things are about to get
wet.
Harry's words, not mine. Harry, as usual, is in very high demand this year, but personally really only wants to ask Hermione, but is reluctant to do so because he doesn't want to make things weird. Hermione usually goes to this party with McLaggen, who does still have a crush on her in this version of things, but she only ever does that to make Ron jealous, and that's not really in play this year. On the whole, she's really just having to avoid McLaggen around the common room as much as possible, but it's getting hard. But then one morning when Hermione's having breakfast with Harry and Ron in the Great Hall, Cormac finally spots her and comes over and interjects himself into the conversation. And here he asks her point blank to go to the party with him, somewhat catching her off guard. Harry, seeing her struggle to say no, is struck with inspiration and speaks up. Actually, she just agreed to go with me. Right? Hermione looks back startled, but confirms this answer. Cormac, however, looks quite grumpy about the situation as he slinks away. Hermione then thanks Harry for getting out of the situation and gives him a quick wink before she heads off to Ancient Ruins. And then there's Ron, who's normally not at this party at all, but now is in need of a date. Almost comically, just after Hermione leaves, the exact same situation proceeds to play out for Ron. Ginny and Luna sit down with Ron and Harry, Hermione having just told Ginny that Harry and her are going to the party together. And it's at this moment when Lavender arrives on the scene and asks Ron if he'll go with her to Slughorn's party, which is really presumptuous. It's not like she has an invite to even give. Ron, inspired by Harry's quick thinking not moments ago, looks up and says, actually, Luna's just agreed to go with me, right? Luna stares back at Ron, completely unfazed in any way at all, and simply says, yes, I'd love to go with you to Slughorn's party. Harry stares at Luna, unsure whether she was caught off guard or was just completely prepared for a situation like this. Lavender storms off, and Ron, of course, makes it very clear to Luna that this is just as friends. All in all, Slughorn's party is way more fun than usual. There's way less romantic politics floating around. The only real thing that happens is Draco gets caught gate crashing. Apparently. Snape still escorts him out of the party, and Harry still lets his curiosity get the better of him and sneaks around and follows them. And you might think that this time around, with Draco's allegiance being on the other side of things, that he would actually just accept the help from Snape this time, but he still doesn't. And that's because from Draco's point of view, Snape is a full-on Death Eater, and as we said, Draco is really not committed to their cause. That said, he's probably less of an overall jerk to Snape, but still uses all of the same arguments. The really alarming thing for Harry, though, is that he had not considered at all that Draco could possibly be a Death Eater or working for Voldemort somehow. But this leads to the Christmas at the Burrow, where, as usual, Harry tells Mr. Weasley and Lupin about the conversation he overheard between Snape and Draco. And as usual, they just talk him down, saying, "Don't you think Snape was trying to get information out of Draco? I mean, after all, his father is a Death Eater." And Harry chooses this time to confide in them that none of it seems to add up, that last year Draco actually helped them out with the DA by stunning Umbridge. But since then, he seems to have been dodging them and making up lame excuse after lame excuse. He even tells them about the Levicorpus incident, which causes Remus to reminisce about how it was such a popular spell when he was at school, which causes Harry to ask him if he knew anyone by the name of the Half-Blood Prince, but of course, he doesn't. Scrimgeour, of course, also shows up during Christmas breakfast to, have a chat with Harry out in the garden about whether or not he wants to help the Ministry out, and Harry, as ever, does not. But that brings us right back to school and Harry's next lesson with Dumbledore, where he witnesses Voldemort kill his father and grandparents and frame his Uncle Morphin for the crime. And it's the first time Harry sees the tampered memory of Slughorns, where Tom Riddle is asking him about Horcruxes, which results in Dumbledore giving Harry homework. Collect the rest of the memory. And as usual, Harry makes a complete blunder of this right out of the gate. During his next class with Slughorn, they're working on antidotes. Harry has no answers in the Half-Blood Prince's copy of Advanced Potion Making and has to present a Bezoar at the end of class, which Slughorn is just enamored with. And yet, despite his good mood, is still extremely put off when Harry asks him about Horcruxes and realizes exactly what he's up to and starts avoiding him at all costs.
Dumbledore put you up to this, didn't he?
That brings us to Ron's birthday, where he is coming of age and turning 17. Happy birthday, Ron! Now, normally on his birthday, Ron is opening all of his gifts in the Gryffindor dorm room while Harry looks for Draco on the Marauders map. And it is also usually when Ron consumes the chocolate cauldron spiked with the love potion that Romilda gave to Harry. I have to imagine Romilda still has the crush on Harry, but since he's not in Gryffindor, she just has a lot less access to him this year, so it's not like as big a deal. But sometimes fate is just fate though, and Ron consuming a love potion on his 17th birthday is just one of those things.
It's beautiful, isn't it? The moon.
It's like
Accio Firebolt!
or Cedric dying. The difference here is that Harry and Ron are actually together down in the Great Hall where they've met up, so Harry can give Ron his birthday gift. Ron arrives at the table with some of his other gifts and an assortment of sweets, all of which he's received for his birthday, including a box of chocolate cauldrons. Ron thanks Harry for the new keeper's gloves, and while Harry dives into his morning baked potato, Ron dives into some of his sweets. And that's when it happens.
I can't stop thinking about Harry.
Except this time it wasn't Romilda Vane, it was Lavender. Having been embarrassed before Slughorn's party, Lavender has now sunk to truly drastic measures to get Ron's attention. Much to Harry's shock, Ron suddenly goes completely dumbfounded and immediately begins professing his love for Lav-Lav.
I think I love her.
Harry, as ever, is extremely caught off guard and disgusted by Ron's use of the phrase Lav-Lav as his one true love. Needless to say, he can definitely tell something is off. What are you talking about, mate? You've been prattling along all year about how annoying she is. For this, Ron punches Harry right in his baked potato. Harry and the baked potatoes is always funny. We got it. For this, Ron punches... You're gonna get it, Riley, don't worry. For this, Ron punches Harry right in his baked potato-filled mouth and makes off for the common room, intent on finding Lavender. Harry, blood pouring from his nose, reaches after Ron, but it's too late. He's off. But knowing Ron would never forgive him for letting him make contact with Lavender whilst in this bizarre state, Harry scans the Great Hall for someone who can help and manages to spot Luna at the end of the Ravenclaw table, eating by herself. Luna! Stop Ron! He's jinxed the poison to something! Harry yells. Luna, again not looking startled at all by the situation, stands up in a nearly robotic fashion, aims her wand at Ron, and shouts, "Stupefy!" "Thanks, Luna," says Harry, arriving at her side. "I think he's been fed a love potion or something. We need to get him up to the hospital wing." "It looks to me more like he's been infested with rack spurts. They float in through your ears and make your brain all funny."
You look dreadful, Ron.
Right, said Harry, not sure how to respond to Luna. Do you think you could help me get him up to the hospital wing, though?" Now, typically after this, Ron is brought to Slughorns, where he is immediately cured and then almost even more immediately poisoned. But now, since he's just unconscious, they just bring him to the hospital wing, where Harry has to leave him because he has Quidditch practice, but Luna stays and is there when he wakes up. And as he wakes up, much to his complete confusion, he sees her protuberant eyes and says, "Luna?" That said, since Ron wasn't poisoned this time, he's not in the hospital wing for like an entire week, meaning he is present to play in the Gryffindor vs. Hufflepuff match where guess who's commentating? Luna, Harry, and Hermione, of course, attend the match to watch Ron and are in absolute stitches listening to Luna commentate about Ron. Ron Weasley catches the quaffle. He is very funny. He asked me to go to Professor Slughorn's Christmas party with him as friends. It was very lovely. I don't get asked to many parties. Ron, who is blushing an impressive shade of red, laughs along with everyone else and thinks to himself, wow, that Luna Lovegood is really growing on me. But then, of course, his attention is immediately torn back to the match where McLaggen is at it again. After the last match, in an effort to make sure that McLaggen doesn't have such an effect on the score, Ron has moved him to beater and Ginny to seeker while Coot plays chaser. As usual though, McLaggen is just barking orders to all the other players, telling Ginny she should first circle the pitch low and then high to cover more ground, looking for the snitch. Ron is obviously unhappy about this and yells back at McLaggen to just focus on the bludgers. Now Ron Weasley is yelling at his beater, Cormac McLaggen. He broke Ron's shoulder in the last match. He asked Hermione Granger to the Christmas party, but she went with Harry Potter instead. This brings Harry, Hermione, and a majority of the stands to near tears with laughter. But only for a second, because feeling highly embarrassed, Cormac spots Harry and Hermione in the crowd and aims an oncoming bludger not at the other team, but at Harry, who, bent over laughing at Luna's commentary, does not see the bludger coming and is knocked out. When Harry awakens, he is now in the hospital wing and has Ron and Hermione by his bed, and as he comes to, Hermione squeezes his hand. Ron informs Harry that McLaggen is now officially off the team, especially since Gryffindor just lost the match. They also tell Harry that once again, Draco was not there. And typically this is when Harry reflects back on Dobby's bludger and thinks of having Creature tail Draco, but this time around he's not actually aware that Dobby is the one who set up the rogue bludger, so he does not come to this conclusion in this moment and does not have Dobby and Creature start tailing Draco. He does, however, decide to pay much more attention to where Draco keeps disappearing off to, a task that promises to be much easier this time around since they are actually in the same house. But before he can put too much attention into that, Dumbledore summons him to his office once again for another lesson. As usual, this is the same, except Dumbledore looks tired, or could it be sick? Harry is reminded of how Lupin often looked the morning after the full moon when they were teaching. He briefly wonders in his mind whether or not Dumbledore could have been bitten, but it seems so unlikely. But what's wrong with his hand? This particular trip into the Pensive, though, just so we're keeping track of things, is when Harry sees Hepzibah Smith show Tom Riddle the locket and the cup and then frames her house elf Hokey for killing Hepzibah when he steals the two items. And they witness Voldemort's return to Hogwarts to request the position of Defense Against the Dark Arts from Dumbledore, who is now the headmaster and who, of course, refuses. Which Dumbledore reveals is why the Defense Against the Dark Arts position has been jinxed, and they haven't been able to keep a teacher in that position for more than a year. This is also when Dumbledore scolds, or, well, projects extremely cold disappointment at Harry for not having put his full effort into retrieving Slughorn's memory, which Harry decides he's going to fully commit to instead of worrying about Malfoy. But even as Harry's thinking about this, his mind is still whirling with the images of Hepzibah Smith and her house elf Hokey. And Harry remembers that he now has a house elf, Creature, who's working there at Hogwarts, and he can have Creature follow Malfoy. He summons Creature to the spot, and of course Creature arrives with Dobby. Harry tells them about his request for them to follow Draco around and find out where he's going, but it turns out they don't have to. Dobby already knows. Normally, Dobby tells Harry about the Room of Requirement in Order of the Phoenix, but this time Harry just used the Chamber of Secrets for the DA meeting, so he had no need of that. Which, speaking of the DA meetings in the Chamber of Secrets and everyone riding the basilisk up back into the school, we asked you guys last time to submit fan art of that happening, and oh my gosh, did you guys deliver? I love them. So you guys, they're so creative. I can't believe how many people with the Magic School Bus theme, but I love it. I love it. I love it. Thank you guys so much. Anyway, Dobby tells Harry all about the come and go room, or the Room of Requirement, and that it's probably where Draco's been because he spent so much time in there last year. How do you know that, Dobby? Dobby told him about it, sir. Last year when you were holding your defense meetings, Master Malfoy summoned Dobby and asked him if he knew of a place he could practice spells and not be noticed. Harry remembers all too well the evening Draco had overheard him talking to Sirius, wondering about this exact question before stepping out of the shadows and offering up the Chamber of Secrets as the location. And you came when he called, asked Harry, surprised that Dobby would still take orders from Malfoy, his former master. It is an old habit, sir, but Dobby does not hate his old master Draco. It was he who freed Dobby, At Harry Potter's request, sir. And suddenly, pieces of the puzzle start sliding into place in Harry's brain, who remembers Draco's really powerful shield charm in Umbridge's office. But how do you know that's where he's going now? Asks Harry. Dobby has seen him in there, sir. Dobby must use the room sometimes to hide Winky's butterbeer bottles and saw Master Draco, but I am not seeing what he was doing, sir. Thanks, Dobby. You've been a real help. And with that, he forbids Kreacher and Dobby from telling anyone any of this information and has them leave. Then the next day, after everyone else has left the dorm, Harry confronts Draco directly about this situation. And with a look that's half horrified and half relieved, Draco admits that he did use the Room of Requirement the previous year to practice defensive magic. And admits he's been continuing to use the room this year to work on a specific project, but he won't tell Harry what it is. Harry, thinking again of the shield charm in Umbridge's office, asks, "You helped us last year, and now you've become so distant. It's possible we could help, you know. I do owe you, after all." Draco looks absolutely torn under the weight of keeping his secret, but also wanting to accept the help. Finally, he speaks, saying, "I can't tell you what I'm doing, but it is a matter of life and death, and if you want to pay me back, I could really use some of that Felix Felicis." Harry, partly out of fear for what Draco means by this, and partly out of his own desire to use the Felix Felicis himself, pauses before finally telling Draco he'll think about it. Meanwhile, apparition tests are upon the 6th years, and Hermione and Ron are old enough to take them. Hagrid sends a note to Harry asking him to come to Aragog's funeral, and Harry reads more of the Half-Blood Prince's version of advanced potion making and discovers the spell Sectum Sempra, noted for enemies in the margin. The next day, Harry's eating dinner, a baked potato, probably, and considering whether or not he should share the Felix Felicis with Draco, when Slughorn's memory! I can use the Felix Felicis to get it! He exclaims to Hermione, who's looking gloomy after hearing about Harry's conversation with Draco, and Ron, who's looking glum, having failed his apparition test by a single half eyebrow. I mean, come on!
All I need's a bit of luck.
That's brilliant! Hermione exclaims, beaming at him. You'll need your cloak! Ron exclaims, and Harry races off to the dungeon to get it before returning with the cloak and the tiny glass bottle. Once back, the three wait for Slughorn to finish his rather large meal and retire to his office for the evening before Harry decides to take about 3 hours worth of the potion. Upon taking the potion, Harry is filled with the infinite sense of possibility and, as usual, declares he's going to Hagrid's.
I've got a really good feeling about Hagrid's. I feel it's the place to be tonight. Do you know what I mean?
Ron and Hermione move to protest because to them this obviously makes no sense, but Harry insists it's the place to be. He throws on the cloak and heads out the door, and Ron and Hermione are helpless to do anything except follow him out of the Great Hall. Then, appearing alone, Ron and Hermione run into none other than Cormac McLaggen, who, recently embarrassed and cut from the Gryffindor team, immediately approaches them and starts berating Ron. He says it was all that loony Lovegood's commentating that just got under his skin, and, looking at Hermione, says whenever she's ready to ditch Potter, he'd be happy to take her out. This sparks reactions from both Ron and Hermione. I thought Luna was brilliant, says Ron, who couldn't have timed his response better because wouldn't you know it, Luna herself walks around the corner at that exact moment to find the scene. Meanwhile, Hermione spits back, I'd never ditch Harry for someone like you. Harry, under the cloak, feels his cheeks burn hot. He and Hermione are, of course, not even together for him to be ditched in the first place. But he can't help but smile that Hermione came to his defense anyway. But from there, Harry exits the scene, finds Slughorn over by the vegetable patches, invites him to Aragog's funeral down at Hagrid's, where the two toast Aragog's death, get a little bit tipsy, it has to be said, and Harry very slyly coaxes the memory out of Slughorn. And from there, Harry heads directly to Dumbledore's office, where the two dive into the final memory and see that Voldemort is seeking a 7-part soul. After they view this memory, Dumbledore finally reveals the story about how his hand became so blackened, and reveals out of a small box the ring from the Gaunt memory that Harry had seen Tom Riddle himself wearing in the Slughorn memory. Unusually, when Dumbledore opens the box, Harry thinks he sees Dumbledore wince in pain, as if the ring's mere presence in the room is causing him physical harm. Bear in mind, in this version of events, the ring has not yet been destroyed because Dumbledore does not have the Sword of Gryffindor, which has also not been impregnated with basilisk venom. Meaning that at present, even if the Sword of Gryffindor was there, they couldn't do anything with it. What Dumbledore does finally have, though, is Slughorn's final memory, and as such, he is ready to tell Harry all of his suspicions about what Voldemort's other Horcruxes are. And, despite the late hour, asks Harry if he'd be willing to accompany him to a room that Harry knows well, the Chamber of Secrets. Harry asks why, and Dumbledore explains that in order to destroy a Horcrux, you need to use very powerful dark magic or else use extremely deadly venom, none of which Dumbledore allows inside the castle. But, he tells Harry, as I've dived into Voldemort's past, I realized you have found a way to destroy them. Putting the pieces together, Harry realizes the basilisk. The basilisk can destroy Horcruxes just like it destroyed the diary. Yes, Harry, the basilisk can destroy Horcruxes, and for that, I have once again needed your help. I, of course, am not a Possummouth, and can therefore not open the chamber, and even if I could, I certainly could not hope to command the basilisk with it. Together, they head down to the Chamber of Secrets, and Harry summons the basilisk, and Dumbledore places the ring on the ground in front of it. Harry tells the basilisk to strike, but as it moves to do so, almost as if it can sense the presence of the thing that can destroy it in the room, the ring begins to vibrate. The basilisk lunges, but as it does, the ring lets out a huge blast of light, and the basilisk recoils. Out of the black stone, a floating image of a girl Harry had never seen before began to emerge. She had long blonde hair, and Harry thought she looked somewhat familiar. You killed me, the girl bellows at Dumbledore. You killed me. Dumbledore, like Harry had never seen him before, stood absolutely frozen, clearly too stunned by the girl's appearance to do anything. Sir, Harry called out, but Dumbledore still didn't move. Sir, what was going on? I would be alive if it weren't for you, the girl screams again. Finally, Harry thinks he understands. This must be some sort of dark magical defense built into the Horcrux. He turns to the basilisk once again and commands it to strike. It does. This time, it connects. The floating image of the girl ripples to the ground like burning ash, and Harry turns to Dumbledore. Dumbledore thanks Harry and tells him he was very brave, and promises he can assist him if he finds another Horcrux. But who was she? Asks Ron the next day. No idea, says Harry, who felt certain he had seen the girl before, but couldn't quite place her in his memory. But really, at this moment, Harry's not paying Ron much attention. He's searching the Marauder's map for Draco. He's finally decided that after feeling the effects of it himself, he will offer Draco some of the Felix Felicis. He is surprised to find him, though, in a bathroom next to, of all ghosts, Moaning Myrtle? He heads to the bathroom and finds Draco in complete tears, which further confirms his decision to offer Draco blind help in whatever endeavor he's facing. Upon hearing this news, Draco rallies almost at once. He is so grateful and thankful to Harry for this, and the two decide that they will work out what night to do it later. And now clearly, this is a huge change from the main story. Typically, when Harry finds Draco in the bathroom, the two have some big duel, and Harry uses Sectum Sempra, which causes Snape to put him in detention every Saturday for the rest of the year. It also then forces him to go hide his copy of Advanced Potion Making in the Room of Requirement, where normally he somewhat inadvertently lays hands on the diadem itself to mark the book's spot, but that doesn't happen this time. Harry doesn't get detention, he doesn't have to go to the Room of Requirement, and he keeps his book. And without detention, he is free to watch the final Quidditch match of the year, Gryffindor versus Ravenclaw. Not that it super matters, as Slytherin and his team have wrapped up the Quidditch Cup with an impressive 3-0, and Gryffindor is already sitting at 0-2, but nonetheless, fun to watch. But in case you're wondering about the lineup, obviously McLaggen is gone at this point and has been replaced by Seamus, who is playing Chaser. Ginny is back at Secret. But possibly even more importantly, Luna is commentating, and it has to be said with an unusual bias for the Gryffindor keeper, despite her herself being in Ravenclaw. But that, at last, brings us to the evening of the lightning-struck tower. It's the last days of the school year, and also the very day he and Draco have finally agreed to let him take a swig of Felix Felicis. But almost immediately upon giving a bit of the potion to Draco, Harry is summoned to Dumbledore's office, who has apparently found another Horcrux. Harry heads immediately to Dumbledore's office, but not before giving Ron the rest of the Felix Felicis first. Not because he doesn't trust Draco, but just because he's aware that under the potion's influence, no defense Harry sets up will be able to stop Draco from getting the rest of it if that's suddenly what he wants to do. But if he gives it to Ron, then Draco won't even know where to look. So since he guesses he's about to be heading into a pretty dangerous situation of his own, he tells Ron, if you end up needing it for any reason, feel free to drink it. Harry and Dumbledore's journey to the cave to retrieve the locket, though, goes pretty much exactly the same. Dumbledore does a magnificent breaststroke, offers blood to the cave wall, finds the chain, gets in the boat, goes to the island, drinks the potion. The big difference is that the drink of despair makes Dumbledore even weaker than he usually is in the main story, which is all a result of having spent so much time in the same room as the ring throughout the year. On top of that, once Dumbledore starts screaming about whatever he's seeing in his head under the influence of the potion, it is clear to Harry that it has very much to do with whoever that floating girl was down in the Chamber of Secrets. Nonetheless, Dumbledore still finishes the potion, they still collect the locket, and he's still able to help Harry fend off the inferior, but he can barely walk and is having a lot of trouble breathing. When Harry and Dumbledore arrive back at Hogsmeade, they are immediately told by Rosmerta that the dark mark has appeared upon the astronomy tower. She's not actually under the Imperious curse this time, but there's still really no reason she wouldn't just tell them this right away. Dark mark. Time for smoke. Harry summons Rosmerta's brooms, but quickly realizes that him and Dumbledore are going to have to share. Dumbledore is just too weak to even ride his own broom. When they land on the tower, Dumbledore slides off his broom and immediately feels his wand leave his hand and hears the words, "Expelliarmus!" Harry looks up and is shocked to see, standing before them, wand raised, Draco Malfoy. "No!" exclaims Harry. "This is what you needed the potion for?" Comprehension dawning all over his face. "Who have you killed? Why is the dark mark in the sky?" Draco, his whole body shaking, responds, I haven't killed anyone. But Harry tracks Draco's wand and realizes his true intended target, Dumbledore. But here, Dumbledore manages to find the strength to speak and begins wheedling Draco's plan out of him. Draco reveals how he fixed the vanishing cabinet in the Room of Requirement, how Death Eaters have entered the school. "He was going to kill me and my whole family," Draco shouts. I had no choice. Understanding Draco's dilemma, as ever, Dumbledore offers him and his family protection. "Draco, Voldemort has tried to kill you twice now. You don't owe him any service. We can protect you. I know what happened between you and Professor Umbridge," Dumbledore continues. "That was very brave of you. You are nothing like your father." Then, in tears and much to Harry's shock, Draco falls to his knees and accepts Dumbledore's offer. But just as he does, Snape arrives on the scene and immediately rushes to Dumbledore's side, who is coughing worse than ever. Harry, feeling the situation has passed, lowers his wand as well and rushes to comfort Draco, thinking himself what lengths he might have gone to save the people he loved. "I know you had no other choice," he says in an effort to comfort him. Draco looks up, having never experienced this level of forgiveness in his entire life, but what he sees brings all of the terror back to his face. Snape's back, and a flash of green light. Avada Kedavra! Harry hears it too and immediately turns around to see Snape standing over Dumbledore's dead body. In shock, Harry sprints to Dumbledore's side, completely missing Snape, who is going in the exact opposite direction, and commands Draco to come with him. Draco, seeing his last hope dead, turns and runs with Snape. Then, after a moment of complete dumbfoundedness, Harry realizes there's nothing he can do and turns to chase. Downstairs, a raging battle is taking place between the Death Eaters, the teachers, the DA, and the Order of the Phoenix. Spells are flying everywhere. Snape announces Dumbledore's death and commands everyone retreat. Ron and Hermione find Harry, who tells them Snape just killed Dumbledore. They have to get him. Ron, for some reason, is carrying what Harry recognizes to be the Sorting Hat. "What's that for?" Harry asks, looking down at the tattered fabric, but there's just no time to explain. The three of them charge outside, chasing Snape, Malfoy, and the Death Eaters, the entrance hall collapsing behind them, blocking any aid from anyone else inside. They fire spell after spell, but can't seem to land a hit. Snape turns around to see who's pursuing them and spies Harry, Ron, and Hermione. He immediately stops, turns, and commands the others to retreat to the barrier. Harry stops as well and screams at Snape, accusing him of killing Dumbledore, and he immediately admits to it. Harry is enraged, and he fires spell after spell after spell at Snape, who easily blocks them all with his wand. Suddenly, from behind Harry, Ron charges directly at Snape, who again blasts Ron back with yet another spell. But as he falls, something silvery falls from the hat. Ron grabs it and rises again with the sword of Gryffindor. Snape eyes the sword and says, "Well, Weasley, I didn't think you had it in you, but no matter. I have more powerful spells than you can deal with." And with that, an enormous, fiery serpent, large enough to rival even that of the basilisk, erupted out of the tip of Snape's wand. "Fiend fire!" yells Hermione. Harry stares in awe as the giant snake slithers through the air and onto the ground, lighting everything around it, including Hagrid's hut, on fire. And for the first time that night, Harry felt like he truly had no idea what to do. He was positive Parselmouth wouldn't work on this snake. But then, to his horror, he sees Ron rush past him once more, sword raised and screaming. "No, Ron, don't!" But it was too late. There was no stopping him. Fear gripped Harry as he watched the serpent lunge at Ron, who plunged the sword upward. The light was almost blinding, but as he watched, more and more of the snake disappeared into the sword until it was all gone. All that was left to light the night was Hagrid's hut, which was still ablaze. Harry looked up to see Snape watching the scene unfold, and then, without giving a second thought, remembered a spell from his potions book. 4 enemies.
Sectum Sempra!
Snape reacts a moment too late, and Harry's spell connects, severing his hand and destroying his wand. At this moment, Ron collapses from the effort of holding the sword, and Harry and Hermione rush to him. Snape takes the opportunity to escape, one-handed, and Harry never learns the identity of the Half-Blood Prince. In the aftermath of the battle, Harry finally learns what happened back at the castle with Ron and Hermione. Ron tells him that after Harry left, they noticed the dark mark in the sky, and they tried to alert as much of the DA as they could and alert the Order immediately. They divided up the Felix Felicis among them, but as soon as Ron took his swallow, he felt compelled to visit Dumbledore's office. He wasn't sure exactly why, but he headed straight there and immediately guessed the password. "It just felt like the place to be, you know," said Ron. "And once I was in there, I don't know, I saw the hat and grabbed it. I wasn't sure why, I was just doing what the potion told me." Hermione then fills in everyone's gaps in knowledge about the Sword of Gryffindor because, of course, she's read about it. "It's said to appear to any Gryffindor in a time of need, and it must be goblin-made, which is why it was able to absorb the fiend fire." And from there, of course, Dumbledore's funeral is held, and it's as sad as ever. Harry rediscovers the locket from the cave and realizes it's a fake Horcrux, that the real one's already been taken by the mysterious R.A.B. And as the three of them sit outside, Ron jokes that between his sword and Harry's basilisk, they might just stand a chance against Voldemort. Harry says Dumbledore reckoned his most powerful weapon was still love. As he does so, he meets Hermione's eyes, and she kisses him. To which Ron just rolls his eyes and says, "About time." And that is what happens in year 6 if Harry Potter had been sorted into Slytherin. All right, let's do this. Deathly Hallows, of course, kicks off not with Harry, but over at Malfoy Manor, where Voldemort is having the world's worst snack party ever. By which I mean he just brought a snack for the snake and none of the Death Eaters, who as a result are all just famished. Anyway, the meeting is actually about how they're going to capture Harry on or before his birthday when the Order tries to move him. And more or less, all the same things are discussed, but there are a few differences. First off is Snape, who, if you will recall, in part 6, had his hand sliced off and his wand destroyed by Harry casting Sectum Sempra. But Snape is not still handless. Instead, much the same as Wormtail was rewarded a brand new hand for capturing Harry Potter, Snape has also been awarded a silver hand for killing Albus Dumbledore. Voldemort still takes Lucius's wand, essentially making him one of the wandless and basically a third-class citizen. And he checks with Snape that Snape has procured a new wand for himself, which he has. The Malfoys, as usual, are pretty much just over Voldemort at this point. But the big change is that Draco has already sort of been over Voldemort for like 5 years now. In fact, if you will recall, on top of the astronomy tower, Draco actually accepted Dumbledore's offer to hide his entire family, which might have felt a little irrelevant at the time because Dumbledore died like a minute later, but it did do a lot to harden Draco's true allegiance. So along with Voldemort taking his father's wand and all the other Death Eaters taunting Draco about babysitting the cubs, Draco exists less in just terror and with much more resolve to actually take down Voldemort. He just has to find a way to do it from the inside. As such, in what appears to be an effort to prove himself, Draco volunteers to be a part of the party that is going to go capture Harry. "I'm probably the best fly you've got."
Very well, Draco. You may participate. I do not doubt you are the best flyer here. On a broom,
Voldemort says, mysteriously. 'Cause he can fly. And then Nagini eats Charity Burbage, the Muggle Studies professor. Gross. Meanwhile, over at Privet Drive, Harry is just so frustrated that he can't do magic for another 4 days and is all upset because he read the preview of Rita Skeeter's new book in the Daily Prophet, The Life and Lies of Albus Dumbledore. As he's packing though, he still finds the broken shard of mirror from the two-way mirror Sirius gave him, and he still sees the flash of the blue eye in it. The Dursleys vacate the house as usual, and Vernon puts up all the same arguments, while Dudley, on the other hand, actually turns a corner and tells Harry he doesn't think he's a waste of space. See you later, Big D. And then, as usual, the Order shows up to move Harry. The only little extra awkward part of this scene is that Hermione and Harry kissed at the end of part 6, and now Hermione's having to transform into Harry, so I mean, I think she's blushing pretty hard. I can tell you that Harry is for sure uncomfortable with it, but he doesn't have too much time to worry about it because just as soon as they take off, the battle is on. Complete chaos ensues as everyone takes off in different directions. Hedwig is struck down, Harry loses his firebolt, and Lupin gets a good look at Snape's brand new hand. Snape himself usually slices off George's ear in this battle, but with his new wand, it's not quite as powerful and he only manages to just slice some of it, so it's just dangling there. But the big change is that Draco is also part of the battle, and he's savvy enough to realize that the obvious real Potter is the one with the owl. Duh. Therefore, Draco pursues the correct Potter and tries to take advantage of the chaos to make Harry's journey as easy as possible. But there's only so much he can do. Harry still gives himself away by casting Expelliarmus, and Voldemort still shows up, and when he tries to kill Harry, Harry still shoots the golden flames at him. This act destroys Lucius's wand, and typically Voldemort then tries to take Selwyn's wand so he can attack Harry again. But this time, Selwyn is not there, because in the confusion of all the golden fire, Draco takes advantage and fires Sectum Sempra, slashing Selwyn's face. It sounds really risky, but Draco correctly trusts that Voldemort and the Death Eaters will just assume this was Harry attacking with dark magic because it's exactly the same spell he used on Snape just a couple months ago. Shortly after this, Harry of course crash lands at the Tonks's before portkeying over to the Burrow where Hermione is waiting with an extremely worried embrace and kiss. As we mentioned, George's ear actually hasn't been severed off completely, and he actually starts sporting some really cool earrings to make it look like it's still in the right spot. But as more and more people arrive at the Burrow, they do eventually learn that Mad-Eye was still killed at the hands of Voldemort during the battle. Who then Harry sees inside the head of and finds out that Voldemort is torturing Ollivander, accusing him of lying to him about the twin cores and how Lucius's wand would defeat Harry. And Hermione, for one, is not pleased that Harry can see into Voldemort's head. But you know what? It's okay because it's wedding time! And this goes about the same as usual. Molly tries to separate Harry, Ron, and Hermione so they can't plan anything, but eventually they do all meet up in Ron's room where the sword of Gryffindor is just glistening in the sunlight next to the window. Admiring it, Harry goes to pick up the sword and can't help but notice that even though it's sitting in the sun, it's kind of hot to the touch. Hermione also goes over how you destroy a Horcrux, mentioning of course basilisk venom like Dumbledore and Harry used on the ring. And this time she actually brings up fiend fire right away, just like Ron fought off with the sword at the end of the last year. She explains this would be effective, but whether they like it or not, Snape is an incredibly accomplished wizard who knew what he was doing with fiend fire, and it would be way too reckless and dangerous for them to even attempt it, even if they thought Ron could take down some of the fiery monsters with the sword. Well, the good news is we still have the basilisk, so we can still destroy them. The bad news is we don't have any other Horcruxes, and we're not going back to Hogwarts this year, says Harry. But in other good news, it's Harry's birthday! Yay! Happy birthday, Harry! He's 17! He's of age! And it's a pretty unique birthday for Harry because Rufus Scrimgeour, the Minister of Magic, shows up to deliver the contents of Dumbledore's will to Harry, Ron, and Hermione, which for the most part is the same, but there are a couple of key differences. Ron still gets the Deluminator, Hermione still gets Tales of Beetle the Bard, and Harry still gets the Snitch. But in the main story, this is normally the Snitch that Harry caught with his mouth. In this version of events, Harry just caught it with his hand. So when Scrimgeour gives it to him, Harry is unable to avoid touching the snitch with his hand. Meaning Scrimgeour actually sees the message, "I open at the close," appear on the side. Scrimgeour obviously grills Harry about what this means, but honestly, it doesn't make a huge difference that Scrimgeour sees this. Because for one, they themselves, Harry, Ron, and Hermione, don't know what "I open at the close" even means. And two, Scrimgeour is about to get closed the very next day, so I don't know, I guess his final 24 hours he lives knowing that his theory that Dumbledore was passing messages to Harry was correct. But the other obvious big change here is that Dumbledore typically tries to leave Harry the sword, but obviously he doesn't this time because Ron already has it. And this is kind of a big one because in the main story, they eventually realize the sword is how Dumbledore intended them to destroy Horcruxes. But this time it wasn't even in play before Dumbledore died, so he couldn't have ever even left it to them. It also means, as far as Harry, Ron, and Hermione are concerned, that there's no obvious way Dumbledore left them for for how to destroy the Horcruxes, I guess, other than the basilisk. And that point in particular, I'll warn you now, comes up later. But enough of wills and death and such. It's time for the wedding! Harry, as usual, takes some Polyjuice potion and has to become Barney Weasley for the occasion. And also, as usual, Luna gets bit by a garden gnome on her way in, and her father is just so thrilled about it.
Luna, my love, if you should feel any burgeoning talent today, perhaps an unexpected urge to sing opera or to declaim in Mermish, do not repress it. You may have been gifted by the Gurnumblies.
I know what you're thinking. Guys, you could have changed anything about the story and you included the Gurnumblies. Yeah, you'll see. Krum is, of course, also at the wedding as usual, and I guess still interested in Hermione, but it's not really as much of a jealousy thing here since Harry and Hermione are much more established than Hermione and Ron typically are at this point. But Krum does still point out the symbol of the Deathly Hallows that Xenophilius is wearing and describes it as Grindelwald's mark. The other sort of fun thing here is that normally Krum also notices how attractive Ginny is, and Harry shoots him down, but I don't really see why Harry would shoot him down, so Krum dances with Ginny at the wedding. And on that note, on the whole, the wedding itself is a really great calm before the storm. Harry and Hermione are able to happily spend time together. Ron notices Luna dancing by herself and asks if she wants a partner. She does. Harry does still eventually end up at a table with Muriel and Doge, where Muriel plants all sorts of bad gossip in Harry's head. This is also when Harry realizes that the girl that came out of the ring Horcrux in the chamber must have been Dumbledore's sister, Ariana. Meanwhile, over on the dance floor, Luna is showing Ron the bite on her finger and telling him about how her father advised her to act on any burgeoning talent or any unexpected urges. Ron grins and, humoring her, asks if she has felt any unexpected urges, and Luna unblinkingly stares directly into Ron's eyes and replies, "Yes, I have." But then, almost as if on cue, Kingsley's Patronus shows up and announces that Scrimgeour is dead, the Ministry has fallen, and the Death Eaters are coming. And as usual, Harry, Ron, and Hermione escape to Tottenham Court Road, where they accidentally break the taboo and summon Raoul and Dolohov, who of course they duel and escape again to another random location. But after this, Harry is given another insight into Voldemort's mind, where he witnesses Voldemort forcing Draco to torture Raoul and Dolohov.
More, Raoul, or shall we feed you to Nagini? Lord Voldemort is not sure that he will forgive this time. You called me back for this, to tell me that Harry Potter has escaped again? Draco, give Raoul another taste of our displeasure. Do it or feel my wrath yourself.
And this is an interesting scene because from Voldemort's perspective, he's kind of also torturing Draco here, who he believes is uncomfortable with this kind of work, which he is. But again, Draco is much more bolstered by his allegiance to the other side this time. So Draco tries to use the situation to his advantage, and rather than just casting the Cruciatus Curse, he also casts Sectum Sempra and slices off a huge chunk of Raoul's shoulder. A truly sudden act of violence that actually impresses Voldemort. But back to Harry, Ron, and Hermione, they eventually land on Grimmauld Place, where they set up camp and try and get their bearings. As they explore the house, Harry appreciates Sirius's room even more than normal, feeling that even though they were opposites, they were actually somewhat more the same. Sirius, a Gryffindor born to a Slytherin family, and Harry, a Slytherin born to a Gryffindor family. But as ever, the three of them pieced together pretty quickly that RAB was actually Regulus Arcturus Black, and as always, they summon Creature and get the full story out of him about the cave and how Regulus turned size, and all of that is obviously the exact same since it happened way before Harry was born. But in any case, they have a lead on the locket and send Creature to go find Mundungus, and while he is gone, Lupin shows up. Lupin fills them in on everything else that's happening and offers them his services, which Harry shuts down hard, basically saying that his father would never approve of Lupin abandoning his family. A really true James Potter moment for Harry. And as ever, Lupin storms out and Creature returns with Mundungus Fletcher, who reveals to them that that regular old bag of dead slugs, Dolores Umbridge, has the locket. As they plan their break into the Ministry, some other minor things happen, including Snape being named headmaster at Hogwarts and the Carrows being appointed as teachers, but Harry actually doesn't know who the Carrows are this time because they weren't at the Astronomy Tower this time. That's not super important, but Snape being appointed headmaster still prompts Hermione to steal the portrait of Phineas Nigellus Black. And then they break into the Ministry, which by all accounts goes pretty much the same. I mean, they are acting as other people and as such are treated as those people. Ron gets called away to fix a reigning office. Hermione gets called down to court with Umbridge. Harry goes to her office and steals Mad Eye's eye. He sees the picture of Grindelwald, finds Hermione, they stun Umbridge, steal the locket, and escape, but Yaxley grabs onto them and they lose Grimmauld Place. This, of course, is a huge blow for Harry, Ron, and Hermione, but oh my goodness, did Yaxley let Harry Potter escape again? Oh boy, is somebody about to have a date with Draco and be missing an ear. Sucks to suck, Yaxley! And it has to be said, Voldemort has taken an absolute shining to this form of punishment. I mean, after all, what better form of payment for his forgiveness could his Death Eaters give than their oh so valuable pure blood? Honestly, it's not that different from one of the protections he had on the cave where you had to cut yourself and offer blood in order to enter. But back to Harry, Ron, and Hermione, it's time to go camping, and they are about to get really good at it. Except for finding food for some reason. As a side note, this is also when Harry has the vision of Grindelwald stealing the Elder Wand from Grigorovich, but he doesn't know it's Grindelwald and can't identify who the young thief is. But more importantly, they now have the locket, and you might think, does that mean they can destroy it immediately because they have the sword? But actually, no, for two reasons. While the sword is presently imbued with fiend fire, the same way that it is typically imbued with basilisk venom, none of them have really put that together yet. As far as they're concerned, the goblin-made nature of the blade is actually what allowed Ron to stop the fiend fire. But also, even if they realized it, they'd still have to figure out how to open the locket before they could destroy it. That said, they do decide to set the sword out whenever they set up camp. It's just sort of an extra layer of defense in case anyone shows up. And Harry can't help but notice that it feels really warm whenever he passes by the sword, or maybe that's just from sitting by the fire. You might also be thinking, wait, Harry has access to the basilisk. Him and Dumbledore destroyed the ring with it last year. Wouldn't they just go back to Hogwarts to try and destroy the locket? But again, no. Even in the main story after they get the locket, Harry doesn't see this as an option. Harry's first thought was of the Forbidden Forest, and for a moment, even though he knew how foolish and dangerous it would be for them to appear in the grounds of Hogwarts, his heart leapt at the thought of sneaking through the trees to Hagrid's hut. But the other big change here is how the locket affects Harry whilst he's wearing it. Which is actually a lot different because Harry was sorted into Slytherin and has proven time and time again that he is a true Slytherin. He can control the basilisk, and this was a relic once owned by Salazar Slytherin. So, unlike usual, when Harry puts the locket on, he starts hearing a voice inside his head repeating over and over.
Only the determined can open me and find my secret. I can lead you to the power you seek. I can help you succeed in your ambitions.
Harry immediately assumes this is Voldemort talking to him from inside the locket, and remembers what happened when Dumbledore tried to destroy the ring, how his secret shame emerged from it and began accosting him. Ron and Hermione feel similar sentiments when they are wearing the locket, but for them, it actually is Voldemort tempting them towards power. But unbeknownst to Harry, for him, it is not the voice of Voldemort. It is instead Salazar Slytherin himself, speaking in Parseltongue. Harry's mood also doesn't seem to be as affected as the other two, so he volunteers to wear the locket more, but Ron and Hermione, knowing how the locket makes them feel, don't like the idea of Harry hearing Voldemort whispering in his ear all the time. And so it goes. Days turn into weeks with little progress. Ron begins taking the sword out and practices swinging it around whenever they stop just to pass the time. Harry notices that despite the weather becoming quite cold outside, Ron returns from these practice sessions just absolutely covered in sweat, but also with an absolutely improved mood. Harry chalks this up to the benefit of exercise, but in actuality, it is the sword cleansing the effects of the locket on Ron. Which is not to say spirits are uncrushably high or anything. I mean, they are still camping around with a Horcrux and failing to gather or multiply food in any sort of meaningful way consistent with their characters. Seriously, this just always bothers me. Like, summon some fish, y'all. Jeez. Speaking of which, though, you know who does know how to summon fish from the river? Ted, Dean, Dirk, Gornuck, and Grip Hook, or as I like to call them, the Beatles. These five are of course still on the run and still almost run into Harry, Ron, and Hermione's camp, where Harry, Ron, and Hermione eavesdrop on them and learn some crucial information. Typically, they all trade stories about Ginny, Luna, and Neville trying to break into Snape's office to steal the Sword of Gryffindor, but of course, Snape never had the Sword of Gryffindor, so that doesn't happen. However, they do still mention the Quibbler and how it's the only thing worth reading, and Dean does still mention that he reckons Harry Potter is the real deal. He did slice off Snape's hand and break his wand after all. Griphook chimes in and says that he heard about this, but the goblins were actually more concerned with the appearance of the long-lost sword of Gryffindor and how it absorbed all of those flames and is likely extremely powerful now. And Harry, Ron, and Hermione all immediately revel in this information, realizing that they've had the solution with them the whole time. Excitement is high as they pull out the locket and the sword. Ron raises the sword above his head, and almost as if it knows its intended purpose, the sword lights itself on fire. Seeing this and filled with confidence, Ron brings the sword down hard on the locket. But much to his surprise, the locket remains completely untarnished. I know, bummer, right? Thought they had it. But Harry, similar to the main story, knows why it didn't break. Because it's not open. Before they can destroy it, they need to open it. But how? He wonders. As Harry ponders this question over the next few days, he watches Ron, who is practicing lighting the sword on fire on command, and reflects on what a true Gryffindor Ron really is. He stares at the locket, wondering how to open it, really taking in the large ornate S, and then realizes with a start that the locket used to belong to Slytherin. Now, of course, they always knew this to be true, but the entire time they've had it, Harry has been treating it as nothing but a possession of Voldemort's. But with this new brain blast, he thinks back to what Hepzibah Smith said about the locket and the cup, that they're supposed to have all sorts of different powers that she never tested. Which then makes Harry realize the locket must have had powers before it was a Horcrux. Could it still? And what would those powers be? What would Salazar Slytherin have used the locket for? To hide something? But what did he have to hide? But Harry's brain was racing ahead. He knew the answer before he even finished the thought. The Chamber of Secrets! The Basilisk! Parselmouth! It's Slytherin! The voice I'm hearing, it's not Voldemort, it's Slytherin! Salazar Slytherin, and he's speaking Parseltongue. That's why I can hear him, and he's trying to tell me how to find the Chamber of Secrets. That's what he used the locket for. It was handed down from generation to generation till it reached the Gaunts. His heir was supposed to open it. What does that mean, Harry? Asks Hermione. It means I know how to open the locket. Ron, get the sword ready. Ron pokes his head around the corner and says, flame on. Probably not. They lay the locket on the ground outside the tent and gather round. Ron has the sword lit, and Harry stares at the locket and hisses in Parseltongue, open. Now, normally this is where the locket kind of tortures Ron, telling him that Hermione would always have preferred the chosen one over him and that his mother would have preferred Harry over him. This time, however, the taunt is much more cryptic and yet somehow kind of familiar. All that emerges from the locket is a large red moon slowly being eclipsed by darkness. Ron is not sure why, but is filled with an immense cold as the light from the moon fades away. Ron is frozen in place as Harry and Hermione yell encouragements at him, at a complete loss for what they're witnessing. Finally, Ron feels the warmth of the blade in his hand and comes to, raises the sword, and strikes the locket, destroying it. The three celebrate and then immediately converge to discuss what they just saw coming out of the locket. Was that like a boggart? Harry asks. Lupin's boggart was a full moon, but you're not a werewolf. Why would you fear that? A red moon is a lunar eclipse, Hermione continued. We know that from our OWL in astronomy, but what could that mean? Unfortunately for Hermione, though, interpretations of such things was a totally different skill, and if there's one subject Hermione was always really bad at, it was divination. Are we sure it was the moon? Harry asks, thinking back to his first encounter with Firenze and the Centaurs in the Forbidden Forest and how they kept exclaiming, Mars is bright tonight. On that occasion, Harry points out, they were also very close to a piece of Voldemort's soul. Harry and Hermione continue to discuss the mysterious red moon while Ron stands there, sword still in hand, staring at the spot where the moon was, apparently lost in his own thoughts. Typically what happens next is that Ron abandons Harry and Hermione for a couple of weeks, during which the two of them go to Godric's Hollow to look for the sword because they think Dumbledore must have left it there for them to find. But obviously Ron didn't leave this time and they already have the sword, which is not to say that Harry doesn't still want to go visit Godric's Hollow, but usually the idea that the sword will be there is what convinces Hermione that it'll be worth the risk. But not going to Godric's Hollow is kind of a big deal because a lot happens there. They visit the graveyard where they see Ignotus Peveril's grave and the sign of the Deathly Hallows, James and Lily's grave, Dumbledore's family's graves. They go to the Potter's old house, they see the statue of the Potters in the middle of town. Harry gets tricked by Nagini, who's pretending to be Bathilda Bagshot, who tries to hold him for Voldemort to get there, but then Harry escapes, and Harry's wand gets broken, and Voldemort finds the picture of Grindelwald and identifies who the thief is. But this time they don't have any real need to go to Godric's Hollow because, again, they already have the sword, and they can light it on fire. which is awesome. Speaking of lighting the sword on fire, you guys, though, last week we asked you guys to send in submissions of art for Ron fighting the fiend fire with the sword of Gryffindor, and oh my, like, I cannot even tell you how cool it was looking at you guys' submissions. You guys are such good artists. I mean, look at this. Look at this. Look at this. It's so good. Thank you guys so much for your continued submissions. I am loving seeing them. Thank you. But back to our heroes, who, in all their excitement, have now suddenly run out of leads, other than the fact that Hermione finally spots the symbol of the Deathly Hallows in Tales of Beedle the Bard. Harry also recognizes the symbol that Xenophilius was wearing at the wedding, and Ron suggests that they go visit the Lovegoods for, reasons. And suspecting Xenophilius is a safe bet to go visit, and because it sounds like the Quibbler is pro-Harry, and because Ron is all about it, and they don't have any other leads, they decide to go visit Xenophilius. Timeline-wise, we find ourselves right where we would with the main story, which is just after Christmas. Typically, Harry and Hermione visit Godric's Hollow on Christmas Day. As per usual, though, that means Luna was supposed to be sent home for the holidays, but was intercepted by the Death Eaters as a way to put pressure on Xenophilius for all the pro-Harry Potter stuff he's been printing in the Quibbler. Nonetheless, Harry, Ron, and Hermione arrive at the Lovegoods, and Xenophilius indeed fills them in on the tale of the three brothers and what the Deathly Hallows are. As the trio explore the Lovegoods' house, they wander into Luna's room, where they discover painted on her ceiling a very familiar looking red moon. Ron, who fully knew what the Horcrux vision meant from the start, exchanges a very red-faced look with Harry and Hermione, who grin back at him, eyebrows raised. Except they also realize why Ron's vision had seemed so cold. Luna was missing. Pieces of the puzzle started clicking together. But they don't have long to discuss the subject as the printing press starts doing its thing and spitting out copies of the Quibbler, Harry's face on the cover reading undesirable #1. They realize the Death Eaters are on their way, and Xenophilius begs them to stay, saying the only reason he's printing that is because they took his Luna and he wants to get her back. Now, specifically, the two Death Eaters that show up at the Lovegoods house are Travers and Selwyn. Selwyn being the Death Eater that Draco attacked during the Battle of the Seven Potters and slashed his face. What surprises the trio, though, is that Selwyn's face appears to have been repaired with the same glistening silver as Snape's hand. The silver branches away from the wound in every direction, giving Selwyn a frightening, partial metal face. Harry thought back to the silver-masked Death Eaters in the graveyard during his 4th year and wondered if this was some sort of new, more permanent mask. Obviously, Harry, Ron, and Hermione need to escape this situation as fast as possible, and they do in pretty similar fashion as the main story, apparating out just after they let the Death Eaters glimpse Harry's face. Now, normally Ron is furious that Xenophilius has betrayed Harry, but this time Ron is furious that the Death Eaters have kidnapped Luna, and that Xenophilius has betrayed Harry. He vents his frustration by swinging the sword of Gryffindor all around the tall grass in the field they've landed in, singeing the edges wherever it touches. And it's in this moment when Harry has another vision of Voldemort, who is irate.
You saw Harry Potter and let him get away, Travers. It seems to me you are not worthy of the gift of sight. Draco, relieve Travers of his eye.
Almost unbelievably, in the middle of this tirade, Harry, Ron, and Hermione hear, of all people, Luna's voice. But being stranded in the middle of nowhere, they look around thinking there's no way Luna can somehow be here. They hear the voice again, and this time Harry and Hermione look directly at Ron, thinking the voice somehow came from him. Ron reaches into his pocket and pulls out the Deluminator. The three look on in awe as Luna's voice emits faint but clear from the small device. My friend Ron had one of those. He fought a giant fiery snake with it. Confused, Ron clicks the Deluminator, and to their surprise, a small ball of light emerges and enters Ron's chest right next to his heart. Ron gasps, I know what to do! And then, without warning, disapparates, and Ron is gone. Harry and Hermione stare at each other, absolutely dumbfounded. Where had Ron just gone? How was he going to find them again? They call his name out over and over, Ron, Ron, but darkness is falling, and they realize there's simply no hope of him hearing them.
Ron?
Crack! Ron arrives in the basement of Malfoy Manor to find Luna, Ollivander, Griphook, and Dean, who are all being held captive there. Ollivander, Griphook, and Dean turn, completely shocked at the sudden appearance of Ron. Luna, however, just slowly turns her head as if she was expecting Ron to show up at any moment. Oh, hello there, Ron. I was just talking about you. Where are we? Says Ron. We are in the basement of Draco Malfoy's house, says Luna. Upstairs, the Death Eaters heard the crack of Ron's appearance and send Wormtail downstairs to investigate. Ron, sword still in hand, hides and waits to see who's coming down. Pettigrew demands everyone back against the wall and emerges from the stairs, wand held high. What was that crack? He demands in a squeaky voice. which I'm sure you heard. Ron immediately recognizes the voice and, filled with hatred, steps out, sword raised. Wormtail is shocked as he takes in the sight of the sword. "Well, if it isn't my old pet Scabbers," says Ron as he breaks into a run, the sword lighting up over his head. Gotta say, he's getting really good at this. But Wormtail reacts quickly. "Expelliarmus!" Ron is blasted backward, the sword of Gryffindor landing at Pettigrew's feet, who picks it up and reads the name on the sword with a greedy look in his eyes.
So, this is the sword that stopped Severus's fire. The Dark Lord has been looking for this for a long time."
"Give that back!" yells Ron. "You're not worthy to even look at it. You're no Gryffindor!" Peter smiles maliciously down at Ron and raises the sword as if to strike him down. But then, as if with a mind of its own, the sword erupts back into flames. Except this time, the flames tear right down the hilt, and in a single moment, Peter's entire body is engulfed in fire. His screams fill the entire basement. Draco rushes down the stairs and takes in the entire scene. Wormtail writhing on the floor, the inexplicable appearance of Ron with Luna, Dean, Griphook, and Ollivander all crowding behind him. "Voldemort will hear about this," Draco says, but as he does, another loud crack is heard all the way around the basement. Draco then meets Ron's eyes and mouths the word, "Go." And with that, Ron apparates out of the basement, the other four in tow, back to Harry and Hermione. Pure shock and relief are visible on the faces of Harry and Hermione as Ron reappears, but only for a moment before it is replaced by confusion at the sudden appearance of also Luna, Ollivander, Dean, and Griphook. Ron fills them in on everything that had happened and how the sword turned on Pettigrew and how Draco had come down the stairs and threatened them, but then also encouraged them to leave. Then, almost on cue, Harry is sucked once more into Voldemort's mind. He is furious as he arrives at Malfoy Manor, Draco having summoned him to find that Wormtail is dead and his prisoners have escaped. Harry can feel Voldemort's rage building as Draco explains what happened, how he came downstairs and Wormtail had somehow set himself on fire, how he had screamed Voldemort's name as he burned, breaking the taboo in the basement, allowing Ron and the others to escape. "But not before I collected this from him, sir," says Draco, presenting Voldemort with the sword of Gryffindor. And at this, Harry feels Voldemort's rage melt into pure elation at the sight of the sword.
"I have been looking for this for a very long time. Well done, Draco. Well done,"
says Voldemort, his red eyes ablaze as he stares down at the sword.
"Bellatrix," he calls out, "we have a new treasure I will need you to store with the other relic in your vault."
After this, Harry arrives back in his own mind in the tent, gasping for breath. "The Lestrange vault," he yells. "Gringotts, there's another Horcrux. He's got another Horcrux at Gringotts." And from there, Ron suggests they head to Shell Cottage, where the others can recover, and because Bill is likely to be some help if they're going to break into the bank. Over the next few days, they learn more about what happened in the basement and guess that Ron was able to apparate into the basement because of whatever magic Dumbledore had imbued into the Deluminator. Which, in case you're wondering, is love. The Deluminator can bring you to the people you love, and it's way more powerful than like little anti-apparition stuff they would have set up in the basement. Full video by clicking the card. Harry also realizes that Draco successfully lied to Voldemort about Peter breaking the taboo and that he, Draco, had done it himself to help them. Now, one big difference about the group arriving in Shell Cottage is that usually Harry is really pressed for time because they went to Godric's Hollow and Voldemort was able to learn the identity of the thief. But this time Harry is not so pressed for time, so he's able to question Ollivander at his leisure and confirm the existence of the Elder Wand, which prompts Harry to have his usual vistas of truth opening up to him from every direction, where he suddenly realizes exactly what Dumbledore wanted him to do and to collect the Deathly Hallows to defeat Voldemort. Harry realizes that the wand is for sure real, the cloak is for sure real, and after remembering Marvolo Gaunt and the ring, is positive the Resurrection Stone is real too, and that Dumbledore must have given it to him inside the snitch. Now, normally Hermione shoots all this down pretty hard, but there are a few things that are different this time. Usually, Dumbledore tried to give them the sword via his will, which they figure out was his intended way for them to destroy Horcruxes. This time, however, Dumbledore died before the sword ever appeared. Harry reasons out in his own mind that Dumbledore was trying to point them towards the Elder Wand because it has the power to destroy Horcruxes, and that's why they need it. Xenophilius is the one who told them about the Horcruxes, and now Luna is with them at Shell Cottage, so they also ask her if there's anything else she knows about the Hallows. "Well, me and Daddy once visited the grave of Ignotus Peverell in Godric's Hollow when we were harvesting shrivel figs. He and his brothers are thought to have been the original owners of the Hallows, you know." Harry, who has his own reasons for wanting to visit Godric's Hollow, perks up at this information. "One of the Peverells is buried at Godric's Hollow? I wonder if Dumbledore could have hidden the wand there. If we're gonna break into Gringotts, we're gonna need all the power we can get. I'm not sure, says Hermione. Ron, who we know is the one who always wants the wand to begin with, and who is feeling guilty for having lost the sword, their only other way to destroy the Hallows, and who kind of wants to appeal to Luna's beliefs, agrees with Harry. They should go to Godric's Hollow. But if Dumbledore knew where the wand was, why didn't he use it, Harry? Why did he wait all year to destroy the ring with you and the basilisk? Argues Hermione. Dumbledore never wanted power, Hermione. How many times was he offered the job of Minister of Magic, and he always refused, said Harry, thinking back to when Tom Riddle visited Dumbledore in his office asking for a job. But this is Voldemort, Harry. Certainly Dumbledore could have justified the use of the wand to destroy a Horcrux. Or maybe, says Ron, maybe you can't use one Hallow to destroy the other. So you couldn't have used the wand to destroy the ring, could you? Even Harry feels like this is kind of a stretch, but as he wants to go to Godric's Hollow, he goes along with Ron. Yeah, that makes sense. And realizing there's simply no talking them out of it, Hermione agrees on the conditions that they are extremely careful. And over the next few days, they make preparations to go to Godric's Hollow. If we're going to Godric's Hollow, Harry, somewhere I'm sure Voldemort will expect you to go, I think we should disguise ourselves using this. And with a flourish, she produces a vial of Polyjuice potion from inside her beaded bag. And I think we should wear the invisibility cloak. When Harry, Ron, and Hermione arrive in Godric's Hollow, a light snow is falling, and the three are disguised as muggles using hair they stole earlier in the week. Together, they set off for the graveyard, where they hope to inspect the gravestone of Ignotus Peverell, and where Harry hopes to find his parents' graves. On their way, they come across an obelisk in the center of town that, as they approach, transforms instead into a statue of Harry and his parents. Look, Harry, it's you, says Ron. Harry stares in awe at the statue and notices with some curiosity that him and his father's heads are covered in snow, while his mother's remains completely pristine. Perplexed, but not particularly bothered, they move on to the graveyard. And the graveyard is pretty emotional. Despite all of her arguments about coming, Hermione is actually really happy for Harry that he gets to visit his parents' graves, and explains the description on their headstones. The last enemy that shall be defeated is death. Ron, who was giving the two of them a moment, finds Dumbledore's grave and calls them over, and personally takes in the words, "Where your treasure is, there will your heart be also." He thinks of how Dumbledore himself must have chosen these words, and of the Deluminator, and how it brought him to Luna. Together, the three of them move on and eventually do find Ignotus's grave, which does have the symbol of the Deathly Hallows on it, but otherwise provides very little context or clues at all. "It must be here," says Harry, starting to feel a little frustrated. "I know it must be. Maybe the words on Dumbledore's mother's grave are a hint? The treasure I seek is the wand. Where is my heart?" he says, and looks up at Hermione and gets an idea. "My parents' house! The last place we were all whole and together," Harry says. It wasn't hard to locate the remains of the Potter residence. At the end of the row was a dark mass, the wreckage of the former home. And like always, as they approach and touch the gate, a sign emerges from the ground, explaining, "The house is invisible to Muggles, but remains in disrepair as a monument to the Potters and the violence that tore apart their family." Tears fall from Harry's face as he reads the graffiti etched into the sign. But then something bright catches Harry's eyes. A silver doe is emerging from beyond the house and approaching the trio. Hermione gasps. "No way," says Ron. Harry himself stood in disbelief, but felt this is it, instinctually knowing the doe was a friend. The doe slowly approaches Harry before bowing its head and turning back towards the house. And without thinking, Harry follows the doe across the gate and towards the front steps of the property. As Harry gets closer, amongst all the decay and wreckage, Harry is surprised to find flowers. Beautiful, tall lilies, standing proud as if they had just been planted there that morning. Harry reaches out to brush the snow off one of the petals when suddenly something else emerges from the flowers. A stem? No, this wasn't like the green stems around it. This was a wand. Harry grabbed the wand and felt a sensation of absolute warmth wash over him, a feeling he hadn't experienced since being chosen by his own wand back in his first year at Ollivander's. Harry turns and shows the others, who are staring at him in complete shock. "Can't be, can it?" asked Ron. "I don't believe it, Harry. You were right, but who cast the Patronus?" asked Hermione. But Harry has no time to answer, because just then a noise shuffles behind them. They turn and find the outline of a woman who appears to be dressed in rags and who had clearly been watching them. It is, of course, Bathilda Bagshot. Sort of. who beckons them to follow her. Harry remembers Muriel and Doge talking about how Bathilda Bagshot knew the Dumbledores and guesses it must have been her who cast the dough. This is it must have been her, and maybe now she's here to tell us how to open the snitch. I open at the close. This is the close, the end of the quest. Hermione's not quite sure this totally makes sense, but having been proven so thoroughly wrong just now about the Elder Wand, trusts Harry's instincts and follows. And we all know what happens next. Ron and Hermione stay downstairs while Harry follows Bathilda upstairs. Bathilda turns out to be a giant snake who attacks Harry and calls Voldemort there. Hermione and Ron rush in. Hermione casts a Confringo spell that bounces around and crushes Harry's wand, and at the last second, she manages to apparate the three of them away. Harry, Ron, and Hermione arrive back at Shell Cottage with Harry horridly bitten. Meanwhile, Voldemort screams in fury as Harry escapes, until, that is, he looks down and finds the picture of the thief he's been looking for. Harry awakens the next day to the horrible news that his Holly Wand has been broken. Yeah, but you've got the Elder Wand now, mate, says Ron, trying to console him. But for Harry, this is still not great news. The Elder Wand to him was only ever a means to destroy the Horcruxes. His own wand had held the protection of the twin cores, and even when he thought of possessing the Elder Wand, he still thought he'd use his original wand when facing Voldemort. He voices this concern to Ron and Hermione, who suggest, well, maybe you can fix the old one with the Elder Wand. Cheered by this thought, Harry gets out of bed and finds the new wand they recovered from Godric's Hollow and directs it at his old wand. Reparo! The Hollow Wand jumps together, but doesn't look fully healed. Harry tries casting a spell with it, but it just falls apart and sparks. Concerned, Harry brings the new wand to Ollivander to find out if he can tell him anything new about it, and it turns out he can.
Ah, yes, mahogany, 11 inches, pliable, excellent for transfiguration. This wand belonged to James Potter.
Welcome to part 2, everyone. We have a lot to cover today, so we're just gonna dive right on in, right where we left off, which, as a refresher, was just after Ollivander revealed that the wand Harry, Ron, and Hermione recovered from Godric's Hollow was not the Elder Wand, but actually James Potter's. Harry has never felt more confused in his entire life. They followed the clues right to the Deathly Hallows. They went to Godric's Hollow. They found a wand, a silver dough, led them right to it. How could it not be the Elder Wand? And suddenly the entire trip to Godric's Hollow was starting to feel like a fiasco. Hermione was right. They put themselves in harm's way for nothing. And now Harry's original wand was broken. And then, to make matters worse, Harry is visited by a vision from inside of Voldemort's mind, where he has finally identified the thief who stole the wand from Grigorovich. Harry snaps back to reality and falls to the ground with a sudden realization. He's after it too. What's happened, Harry? What did you see? Says Ron. Harry explains to Ron and Hermione what Grindelwald had stolen from Grigorovich. It was the Elder Wand itself. And now, not only did they fail to recover the Elder Wand themselves, but they gave Voldemort the exact information he needed to find it himself. But then who conjured the dough, Harry? Asks Hermione. Someone must have cast it to lead it to your dad's wand. But why? Harry has no answer, and his feelings are extremely mixed. The truth is that just days ago, the idea of being presented with his father's wand, which by all accounts seems to have chosen him and to have been led there by some sort of secret ally, would have been comfort beyond belief. And over the next few days, Harry is plagued by a cycle of thoughts about the dough, getting his hopes up over and over that could it have somehow been Dumbledore? But then having all of his hopes drop as he remembers over and over that Dumbledore is dead and his Patronus was a phoenix. And to make matters worse, Harry visits Voldemort's mind 2 more times. Once to see him question Grindelwald about where the Elder Wand is, and a second time to see him break into Dumbledore's tomb and steal it. However, at the very least, now Harry's path was clear. Dumbledore had not been sending him to collect the Hallows. He was meant to destroy the Horcruxes, and he knows where the next one is. Plus, we don't need the Elder Wand to break into Bellatrix's vault to destroy the Horcrux, because we can just steal the sword back when we're in there, says Ron. And while this is true, Harry can't help but think that when he imagined having the Elder Wand being the master of death, breaking into Gringotts felt laughable, even easy. But now, faced with the same prospect of breaking in but unaided by the Elder Wand, which Voldemort now has, makes the task feel impossible. Now, that said, you may have noticed that their trip to Gringotts is going to be a little bit trickier than usual this time around, because usually they have a hair of Bellatrix and her actual wand, 2 very useful things for breaking into Bellatrix's vault. Plus, Griphook usually only agrees to help Harry because he watched Harry bury Dobby, which obviously didn't happen this time. So how are they going to break in? Well, really, it's not that different. The fact that they don't have Bellatrix's wand or hair isn't that big of a deal. In fact, even in the main story, after they go through with that plan, Harry remarks about how foolish it was. The more he thought about it, the more foolish it seemed to have disguised Hermione as Bellatrix, to have brought along Bellatrix's wand when the Death Eaters knew who had stolen it. So instead, they just transfigure Hermione the same way they do as Ron to try and look as similar to someone who might be related to Bellatrix, which really isn't that hard because of the crazy curly hair on both women. And then their plan is just to rely on the Imperious Curse cast by Harry under the invisibility cloak to force any resistance to just simply believe whatever they're seeing is real. They also have the small advantage that there are no special rules around the Lestrange family vault this time around because Bellatrix doesn't suspect anyone has broken in. Additionally, not looking like Bellatrix means they don't attract the Death Eater Travers into conversation when they arrive at Diagon Alley. Which is not to say they don't see Travers, they still do, and his new silver encrusted eye, which, like Selwyn's, branches out like lightning in every direction from the wound. Griphook also still helps them because, let's face it, he's greedy and he wants the sword, which they do still promise to give him once they break into the vault, which he knows they're telling the truth about because he saw Ron lose it at Malfoy Manor. Plus, Ron saving Griphook from Malfoy Manor also goes a long way in him helping them. That said, as usual, Harry and Ron do still plan on turning on Griphook and keeping the sword for themselves, at least until after the Horcruxes are destroyed, which Hermione doesn't like, but does have to go along with. And so their break into Gringotts, at least getting past the front desk, actually goes a little bit smoother than usual. Hermione asks to go to the Lestrange family vault. Harry imperious's Bogrod at the front desk, who totally believes that Hermione is a Lestrange. And once they're past the front desk, honestly, we all know their disguises don't matter anyway. Harry immediately takes off the invisibility cloak, and the thief's downfall just washes off all of their disguises anyway. After their disguise is gone, it sets off all the same alarms it usually does, which sends all the goblins into a tizzy as they try and pursue Harry, Ron, and Hermione into the depths of Gringotts. But as usual, they are not fast enough, and Harry, Ron, and Hermione make it down to the Lestrange family vault, get inside, and recover the cup and the sword. And as usual, this is where Griphook decides to betray them and steal the sword for himself and try and lock them in one of the vaults. But the difference is, as Griphook runs away with the sword, much like it did to Pettigrew, the sword lights on fire and tries to set Griphook ablaze. But Griphook is faster than Pettigrew and manages to drop it before he's set on fire. And the sound of the sword clanking to the ground amidst all the other confusion alerts the dragon to Griphook's location, and he rears back to try and blast him with the sheet of fire. But Hermione sees what's about to happen, and despite Griphook's betrayal, she still sprints forward and tries to stop it, yelling, "Accio sword!" She catches the sword mid-air and jumps in front of Griphook just before the flames hit him, and much like Ron fighting the fiend fire, manages to absorb all of the dragon fire now into the sword as well. She turns to Griphook, who is now cowering in fear behind her, and says, "We're keeping this." The dragon, interestingly, for however blind it is, seems to have taken in what happened, and as Hermione turns back to it, is surprised to find it lowering its head to her. Shocked, she then turns to free Ron and Harry from the vault, after which they free the dragon, climb on its back, and escape through the ceiling to safety. Huzzah! They ride on the dragon's back for a while before finally jumping off into some water next to a small island. But as ever, Harry is visited by another vision of Voldemort, who has been informed of the break-in, and at long last realizes Harry has been hunting Horcruxes. And in an absolute wave of fury, Voldemort's wand drops over and over. Having adopted Draco's new form of punishment, Sectum Sempra slashes through the air, cutting up every Death Eater in sight. And then he starts recounting all the locations of his Horcruxes he must now go check. The cave, the shack, Hogwarts, Nagini. The cave, the shack, Hogwarts, Nagini. Back on the island with Harry, Ron, and Hermione, Harry bolts up and says, "Hogwarts! There's a Horcrux at Hogwarts I've just seen!" But Ron and Hermione are focused on something else. The cup sitting before them. Hermione's still holding the sword, and she hands it to Ron for him to destroy it like he did the locket, but Ron looks up incredulously. "What? No, I think this one has to be you." And so Hermione, with the dragon still soaring overhead, raises the sword, which immediately erupts into flames and lets out an ear-splitting dragon call. She brings the sword down hard on the cup, and it is destroyed instantly. Harry and Ron simply stare on, as impressed as they've ever been. Harry turns to Ron and says, "We're dating, you know." Hermione beams. "Yeah, just don't cross him, mate. I thought you were good with dragons. She's got you beat." And from there, they obviously need to make their way to Hogwarts, where they can't apparate, so they do the next best thing. Hogsmeade. And of course, we all know how that goes. Caterwauling Charm, Death Eaters, Dementors, Patronus, Aberforth, his cat, his goat Tronus. Typical. What's not typical, though, is that with Harry and Slytherin, Neville has been far less involved than usual. And as such, he has not formed his little secret base in the Room of Requirement. Which is not to say Neville isn't still a really highly motivated and skilled fighter. He's just not the little leader of the in-school rebellion like he normally is. Which is a problem because Neville and his secret base are usually how Harry, Ron, and Hermione Hermione make their way into the castle. But the good news is there's a very obvious and absolutely amazing way to get into the castle that we have not been able to use until now. Dobby. Usually Aberforth is the one who sends Dobby to help Harry, Ron, and Hermione in Malfoy Manor. But since Ron had the Illuminator this time and managed to rescue everyone by himself, that didn't come into play. So Dobby is still alive. And not just alive, but has a good relationship with Aberforth and has the unique magical ability to apparate inside the walls of Hogwarts. So after Aberforth calls Dobby and offers the solution to the trio, Harry asks him, "Is that true, Dobby? You can apparate inside the castle?" And Dobby replies,
Of course, I'm an elf.
"Yes, Dobby, you are. Dobby to the rescue." Not wanting to risk being seen by the Carrows or Snape upon entering the castle, though, they have Dobby apparate them into the one section of the castle they are positive will not be under watch: the Chamber of Secrets. Back inside the castle, y'all. Feels like we need some smoke. Once inside, however, Hermione realizes that the three of them aren't going to be able to search the entire castle by themselves to find something no student in 50 years has found. Certainly, at least not before Voldemort arrives. Speaking of whom, Voldemort has now checked the shack and is sailing across the lake on his way to check on the locket. Hermione looks around and, inspired by the location of their old DA meetings, has an idea. She pulls out the master coin they used to use to set dates for the DA meetings and changes hers to read, "Call Dobby." And within seconds, Dobby begins hearing his name being called, and with a crack, leaves and returns with Neville, Luna, Ginny. And over the next 10 minutes, the room slowly starts to fill as the house elf flutters around the castle from room to room, bringing people to the chamber. From there, Harry explains they need to find something of Ravenclaw's and find it fast. Voldemort is on his way to the school. The next bit plays out as you might expect. Luna offers up the idea of the lost diadem of Ravenclaw, and she and Harry decide to head up to the Ravenclaw common room to look for it. Of course, they don't find the diadem in the common room, but this is where Harry runs into the Carrows and McGonagall. And while Harry doesn't have the exact same relationship that he usually has with McGonagall, telling her that he's working on Dumbledore's order and her absolute faith in Harry is still enough to mobilize her to start setting up defenses around the castle.
I've always wanted to use that spell.
And it's a good thing too, because Voldemort is on his way. Harry realizes that the castle is going to need as many defenders as possible and has Dobby return him back to the chamber, where he's alarmed to find most of the former members of the DA and most of the members of the Order of the Phoenix as well. Turns out while Harry was in the Ravenclaw common room, Dobby was busy. Word got around. Impressed, Harry calls the basilisk and, like he did for the DA meetings, has it ferry everyone up to the Great Hall, where McGonagall has gathered other students and is preparing for battle. Snape, as usual, does his best to try and reach Harry so that he can tell him the truth about everything and give him the memories, but as usual is driven from the school before he can do so by the other teachers. Now, normally this is the part where Harry realizes that nobody in living memory has seen the diadem and goes talk to Nearly Headless Nick about the Grey Lady. This time, however, Harry doesn't have any relationship at all with Nearly Headless Nick, and so instead he has to go consult the Bloody Baron. And much to Harry's dismay, the Bloody Baron goes into a very long-winded and overly dramatic story about how he loved the Grey Lady and how he's the one who killed her, and that's why he's carrying these chains. But eventually, like, come on, Baron, it's been like over 1,000 years, get over it. He tells Harry where he can find the Grey Lady, who, after some light convincing, reveals that she told Tom Riddle the hiding place of the diadem, and more pieces of the puzzle click into place in Harry's mind. He hid it the night he came back to ask for a job. That's why he came back. He even realizes that Voldemort's arrogance would lead him to believe he was the only student to ever find the Room of Requirement. The only trouble is, Harry himself has never been in the room. But, fortunately, he knows someone who has. "Dobby!" Harry cries, and the elf appears almost at once. "I need you to bring me Draco Malfoy," and then Ron and Hermione. Dobby does so and explains as much of the situation as he's comfortable to Draco, saying, "We need to enter the Room of Requirement to find the diadem. Is there a way to make it show a room that hides things?" Draco just smiles and immediately summons the room he lived in almost the entire year last year, which of course we all know is filled floor to ceiling with junk. As the four of them and Dobby search the room frantically, Harry asks Draco about being forced to torture the Death Eaters. Draco looks absolutely ashamed of himself, but explains that he was forced to do it as a form of punishment to himself, and decided to try and use the opportunity to incapacitate as many Death Eaters as he could. I'm not sure it worked though. After they paid for their failures, he just healed them with that silver magic. The weird thing is, Snape and Wormtail received their hands as rewards, everyone else as punishment. But in some twisted way, they all wore it like a badge of honor. Proof of their devotion. Proof they'd never let him down again. We'll see. Harry looked at Draco in absolute awe. He really had been doing everything he could to help. He was in the fight just as much as the rest of them and in as much danger, if not more, being right next to Voldemort. And then they see it, the diadem. Harry recognizes it almost immediately, almost as if he can feel the dark magic coming off of it. He turns to Draco to point it out, but that's when he hears it.
Avada Kedavra!
Crabbe and Goyle had followed them into the room.
We knew you'd come here,
yelled Crabbe. Here's the thing. Crabbe and Goyle, obviously not very bright. But by now, even they have heard the story about how Draco used the Room of Requirement to break into Hogwarts last year and help murder Dumbledore. And it turns out when Dobby appeared to whisk Draco away to Harry, Crabbe and Goyle were right next to him and guessed where they might be heading. Harry whirls around looking for Ron and Hermione, assuming the worst, hoping neither of them has been hit by the spell. Draco does the same, and simultaneously they realize it's not Ron or Hermione who's been hit by the spell, but Dobby, who crumples to the ground. At once and together, Harry and Draco raise their wands and shout, "Stupefy!" easily blasting Crabbe and Goyle back. They rush to Dobby's side, but it's too late. He's dead. Dobby, who had done so much, whose freedom had been the first, if not faintest sign that Draco and Harry were actually on the same side. Draco is in tears as he lays to rest the small elf that once served his family in a clearing made amidst the junk. "I think you should do it," says Harry.
"What?"
"I think you should be the one to destroy it. You found this place. You understood it. I think it should be you." "What is it?" asks Draco, holding up the diadem. Harry studies Draco's face for a long time and then makes a decision. "It's a piece of his soul. We have to destroy this one and the snake before we can kill Voldemort." Draco's eyes widen, but he doesn't even hesitate. "How do I do it?" "Fiend fire," says Harry. "I think the room will be able to contain it. Cast it, and we'll all get out." They move the bodies of Crabbe, Goyle, and Dobby outside the room, place the diadem on the floor, and Draco casts the spell. Flames erupt out of his wand, torrenting through the stacks of forgotten items, barreling into the diadem. Harry and Draco slam the door shut just in time. The door fades back into the wall. It's done. I also like to think Draco then summoned a new version of the Room of Requirement that had like one single tiny little hammock in it and put Dobby to rest for good. Outside the Room of Requirement, though, the Battle of Hogwarts has begun in earnest. Spells are flying through the windows, suits of armor are running down the halls, and Harry can see giants approaching the outer gates. "Now what?" says Ron, sword in hand. "Kill the snake," said Harry. "Where is it?" asked Hermione. And on command, Harry enters Voldemort's mind and finds him in the Shrieking Shack, Nagini floating in an orb above him, Lucius behind him.
"Bring me Severus,"
he tells him. Harry puts on the invisibility cloak, and together the four of them begin sprinting through the grounds in the direction of the Whomping Willow. As they pass, they observe the raging battle, the silver glare of so many Death Eater's adornments shining in the moonlight. They watch in horror as a spell bounces off Raoul's shimmering shoulder and hits Lupin in the chest, who falls to the ground, lifeless. Ron spots Luna with a giant bearing down upon her. Him and Hermione veer off to help. "Impedimenta!" Hermione shouts, stopping the giant's club in midair. Ron rushes in with the blazing sword of Gryffindor and slashes the giant's foot, setting it aflame and creating a giant 20-foot pyre in the middle of the battlefield. And in all the commotion, they lose track of where Harry is under the invisibility cloak. Seeing the flames, Harry is immediately reminded of the last time he was sprinting across the grounds like this, chasing Snape. How he had cast fiend fire at them, how he had escaped, and in his rage, Harry trips and the cloak falls off. And that's when they appear. Dementors. Excited by the sudden appearance of Harry Potter, they begin pouring into the grounds. And suddenly, Harry's rage turns to fear. He reaches for his father's wand, but can't find it. He's dropped it when he fell. His mother's screams begin to fill his ears when suddenly, out of the darkness, Expecto Patronum! A brilliant white peacock goes streaking in the direction of the Dementors. Draco's Patronus. It starts to drive them away, but there's just too many. The single peacock can't fend them all off. Expecto Patronum! And suddenly the peacock is not alone. It's joined by the silver doe. Harry whips around to see who cast the spell and cannot believe his eyes. Severus Snape. And the combined strength of the doe and peacock are enough to drive the Dementors away. "You!" Harry yells as Snape descends on him. "You sent the Patronus, but whose wand did you—" "Yes," is all Snape is able to get out before the most unusual thing begins happening to him. Snape's silver hand, of its own accord, grabs his neck, forcing him to the ground, choking him. Harry frantically runs over and tries to help, but he can't stop it. Snape locks eyes with Harry and with his free hand manages to draw a memory from his head with the unknown wand. Harry collects it. And with his last breath, Snape forces the wand into Harry's hand and collapses. Dead. And upon grabbing the wand, Harry is filled with the same warm, glowing sensation that he had when his father's wand had presented itself to him in Godric's Hollow. Shock and confusion flood every ounce of Harry's being. Snape? How? But why? When Harry looks at the glistening memory in his hand, so familiar from all of his lessons with Dumbledore, and knows where he has to go. I have to go back to the castle, he shouts, and he, Ron, and Hermione race backwards while Draco stays behind. His father has found him and Snape. And of course, we all know what happens next. Harry goes and watches Snape's memories. He learns that Snape and his mother met as kids, that Snape loved her for almost all of his life, and that he, Harry, is yet another Horcrux that has to be destroyed. Interestingly, this is also the first time Harry sees his father and the Marauders bullying Snape at Hogwarts. When Snape is hoisted into the air by his ankle, he drops all of his books, and unbelievably, Harry stares down and sees his own copy of Advanced Potion Making and realizes with the start that Snape was the Half-Blood Prince. But there are some big changes here as well, memories that aren't in the main story. First, Harry is brought back to the moment where Dumbledore died and realizes Snape did not kill Dumbledore.
Protect Draco, Severus,
says Dumbledore.
He has just accepted my offer to protect and hide his family, but my time has come.
Harry watches in shock as Dumbledore dies in Snape's arms, but not at his hand. Reflecting back on how the locket affected Ron and Hermione, Harry realizes that Dumbledore lived in his office with the ring for almost an entire year. That, combined with the potion he drank on the night he died, brought him to the point of death. Then Snape points his wand at the ground and yells,
Avada Kedavra!
And you guys thought this thumbnail was a lie. No, it was a clue! Then the memory shifts and Harry sees Snape return to the Potter's home in Godric's Hollow, where he collects Lily's wand and leaves the flowers and James' wand buried underneath. He watches as Snape exits Godric's Hollow and passes the statue in the center of town, where he uses Lily's wand to cast an impervious charm on just her. Actually, while we're here, this feels like a good time to pause and say thank you again to everyone who submitted artwork last week of Harry finding the wand in the lilies at the Potter's house with the silver doe. I've been going through them all week. They're all so amazing. Thank you guys so much for sending these in. Like, it brings me such joy to see how you have brought to life the images in my head, and I just love them so much. Thank you. Thank you all. But back to Snape. The scene changes again and he's talking to Draco at Malfoy Manor. The Dark Lord rewards his most devoted servants. You would be wise not to cross him, Draco, or his own hand may turn on you. He sees Snape in the headmaster's office and Phineas Nigellus informing him that Harry, Ron, and Hermione are heading to Godric's Hollow. Then he watches as Snape casts the doe to lead Harry to his father's wand. And Harry understood that for Snape, this was meant as justification for taking Lily's wand, an exchange, and that to present Harry with the wand of a man he had hated so much was an act of forgiveness. A true demonstration of the faith he had in Harry, the Slytherin boy who had proven Snape wrong about his father, who had shown him the true nature of a Slytherin, perhaps the kind Snape himself always wanted to be. And then Harry arrives back in the headmaster's office, but almost as if on cue, finds himself right back in Voldemort's mind, where he's presented with yet another vision of Snape. But this time it's through the eyes of Voldemort, who is staring down at the dead body of Snape, which Lucius and Draco have brought him. And he sees with the silver hand around Snape's neck that Snape has betrayed him.
Pathetic, he scowls, and yet it is fitting, Severus, and in ways you do not understand.
And then the memory exits and Voldemort begins his speech to the entire battle, instructing Harry to find him in the Forbidden Forest, or else he, Voldemort, shall enter the fray and strike down every one of Harry's allies. And Harry knows what he has to do. He explains the entire situation to Ron and Hermione, who of course try and talk him out of it, but in their hearts know this is how it has to be. Harry tells Hermione that he loves her, and she kisses him farewell. I hope you're not expecting one of those from me, says Ron. And even though the situation is so dire and Ron's joke really isn't that funny, the three of them break into laughter, unsure if their tears are from joy or sadness. I love you too, man, he says to Ron, and they hug. Then Harry takes one last look at his two best friends, dons the invisibility cloak, and turns for the forest. And this walk is as sad as ever as Harry exits the castle and witnesses all of his injured and fallen allies. We already mentioned Lupin, but yes, Fred and Tonks also still die. And as Harry makes his way into the forest, he remembers the snitch and whispers to it, finally, I am about to die. The resurrection stone reveals itself and Harry immediately uses it to summon James, Lily, Sirius, Lupin, and Snape. Yes, Snape. Remember that in this version of the story, Harry's non-stop hatred of Snape across all 7 books hasn't really occurred. And that's because Harry has been in Slytherin this entire time, and thus their relationship has been significantly more mutual. Not to mention, Harry has just witnessed firsthand Snape's ultimate act of forgiveness and sacrifice for Harry's cause. Lily, Lupin, Sirius, and even James all look over at Snape and then back at Harry and smile, as ever impressed by his endless humility and nobleness. "Thank you for the wands," Harry says to Snape, and James nods his head in approval of this gift. And Harry then proceeds to have his usual conversations with the rest, apologizing to Remus, asking Sirius if death is going to hurt, and asking his parents if they'll go with him to the end, which of course they all do. Until that is, Harry reaches Voldemort in Aragog's lair, where he finally drops the Resurrection Stone. Fun note, by the way, but because the Basilisk is alive, the Acromantulas, which usually just sort of flee the forest and run at the school, definitely run in the other direction because, as ever, they are incredibly afraid of the Basilisk. Doesn't make a huge difference, although I like to think it means Hagrid got in a few more punches. In fact, you know what? I'm sure of it. He got in a few more punches. He punched Fenrir Greyback square in the face, which, you know, I guess that probably means that he didn't attack Lavender Brown. There you go, Lavender Brown, not a werewolf, or whatever happened to Bill. Speaking of Hagrid, though, he is also still present for the scene and aghast when he sees Harry entering the clearing. Which brings us back to Harry's imminent death, which goes down very much as you might expect. Voldemort levels the Elder Wand at Harry and shouts, "Avada Kedavra," and kills Harry. For 5 minutes. And surprisingly, the scene in King's Cross actually isn't that much different at all. Most of that scene is just about Dumbledore coming clean about all of his past, which of course is all the same and happened way before Harry was ever sorted into Slytherin. They talk about Snape and the Deathly Hallows. Harry sees the gross, disfigured, baby bloody thing on the floor that Voldemort will become in the afterlife. And then Harry decides to come back, and he and Voldemort both awaken in the forest, although Harry remains completely still, pretending to still be dead. Voldemort, of course, usually sends Narcissa Malfoy to go check whether or not Harry is actually dead, but this time he sends the man who forged his silver army, Draco. Draco checks Harry's pulse, realizes he's alive, and announces to the crowd, "He's dead!" And so the conquering army marches to Hogwarts, moonlight bouncing off their silvery wounds in the trees, Harry in Hagrid's arms as usual. And this next part, I'd like to think if you were reading in a book, the chapter would be called Draco's Army. Voldemort's army arrives at the gates of Hogwarts, Harry's apparently dead body in tow. Everyone stares on in disbelief, unable to take in what they're seeing. Hermione is crying into Ron's shoulder, who's standing next to Luna, their hands clasped. Voldemort announces Harry's death and commands everyone to lay down their arms. Everyone, of course, roars back in opposition, and Voldemort attempts to silence them, but the charm doesn't hold. And Hermione steps forward from the crowd, the sword of Gryffindor on her shoulder. Tears streak down her face, but her voice is calm and steady. "You may have killed Harry, but you'll never kill what he stood for, and we'll never back down," she says, raising the sword above her head, lighting it on fire, which also lets out another ear-splitting dragon cry, which seems to raise the morale and spirit of everyone in the army of Hogwarts. Voldemort merely laughs.
"You intend to slay us all with a single sword, mudblood? Draco, give Miss Granger a taste of what happens to those who cross Lord Voldemort."
And Voldemort's army laughs as Draco walks forward, their anticipation palpable as they know this lone girl is about to suffer much worse than any of them ever have. "That's quite a sword, Granger," says Draco, "but I'm not sure it'll be enough to save you." Harry remained frozen in Hagrid's arms, but couldn't believe what he was hearing. Draco had just lied to Voldemort for him. What was he doing? Harry opened his eyelid a fraction of an inch to take in the scene before him. Draco raised his wand and let out a high, loud, hissing whisper. Harry could barely make out what he was saying. It sounded familiar. Sectum Sempra? But no, Hermione remained quiet. She wasn't screaming. And then all of a sudden, Hagrid seemed to be shaking. What was he missing? But then Harry realized it wasn't Hagrid. The ground itself was shaking. Voldemort looked around in confusion, then suddenly realized what Draco had done and what he had said.
"No! Nagini, kill him!"
He shouted as the great snake lunged forward towards Draco. Draco turned and saw the snake, fangs out and ready to kill. Nagini lunged, but as she did, the floor beneath her erupted and out rose the giant basilisk basilisk, whose fangs engulfed Nagini. The snake writhed, but there was no escape, and with one great crunch, Nagini fell in pieces to the floor, dead. Cheers erupted from the defenders of Hogwarts, but only for a moment before Voldemort raised his wand and they were once again silenced.
You'd use my own basilisk against me? How is this possible? Only those descended from my great ancestor Salazar Slytherin can speak parcel tongue.
You're wrong, said Draco. Any true Slytherin can control the basilisk. That's how Harry Potter beat you 5 years ago in the Chamber of Secrets when you took me down there to try and kill me. The basilisk recognized he was a true Slytherin. Fury is visible on Voldemort's face, the thing that had made him so special, so unique, that proved he was descended from the great Salazar Slytherin, was not what he had thought. The basilisk had coiled itself behind Draco and locked its repaired yellow eyes with Voldemort's red ones. I've repressed those memories a long time, but tonight they came back, and I realized when you possessed me, you left memories of how to control snakes. And now this snake is going to finish you off. And the basilisk opened its huge mouth, threatening death with every horrible long fang. Voldemort stood temporarily frozen, his eyes barely slit beneath his anger. And then his wand slashed through the air, and there was a flash of green light, and his spell connected with the back of the basilisk's throat. And the great snake, who had helped Harry defeat Voldemort once before, who had helped him through the Triwizard Tournament, aided Dumbledore's army, and destroyed the Peveril Ring, fell with a great crash. Voldemort let out a cold, high laugh, but for the first time, his followers did not follow suit. Instead, they just stood there, unsure, confused by what they'd just seen.
Do you see who you follow now? Draco shouted into the crowd. The supposed heir of Slytherin has just destroyed Slytherin's own monster. He sought to kill me, a pureblood. He has had me spill your own blood all year long. You wear those scars like badges of honor, marks of loyalty. But after what you've just seen, do you really think he would ever repay that loyalty to you?
And at these words, a murmur spreads throughout Voldemort's army, followed by a scream. Voldemort turns around to see his nearest Death Eater, Travers, clasping his eye, which is suddenly closing in, crushing the rest of his face. Similar screams can be heard throughout the crowd as every Death Eater who felt even a moment of uncertainty at Draco's words are suddenly being attacked by their own silver adornments. Voldemort's army is crumbling.
No!
Screams Voldemort, who in pure anger turns and fires Sectum Sepra back at Draco. The spell connects, and Draco, standing with his wand still aloft, watches in horror as his arm hits the floor. The army of Hogwarts stares dumbstruck at Draco while Voldemort stares down at his own wand, which has begun glowing. Voldemort feels an unusual sense of warmth rush over him and lets out another high-pitched laugh. And then in unison, the army of Hogwarts lets out their own roar and charges Voldemort's wilting army. Harry finally takes this as his cue to roll out of Hagrid's arms and re-don the invisibility cloak. He runs around the battle, stunning as many Death Eaters as he can, but he almost doesn't even need to help. All around him, the enemy is falling, pulled down by their own silver armor or else by the oncoming volley of spells. But not all of them. Harry noticed Bellatrix Lestrange was still fighting unimpeded, her faith clearly having never wavered from her master. She alone seemed to be battling erratically and skillfully through the throng, spells flying from her in every direction. Harry saw her direct a curse at Mrs. Weasley when suddenly she was blown back by the most powerful shield charm Harry had ever seen. Rubble exploded from a nearby wall as the curse was successfully deflected, and through the debris stepped Neville, wand held high.
You tortured my parents! You...
And like Harry had never seen Neville before, he began dueling Bellatrix, who laughed maniacally and flashed a silver grin back at him.
Crucio!
Bellowed Bellatrix, and Harry watched in horror as the curse connected with Neville. Neville screamed, but somehow miraculously managed to stay on his feet. Bellatrix's guard was down, and although Neville was clearly enduring horrible physical pain, he managed to raise his wand and cast a spell. And as his spell landed, the Cruciatus spell seemed to lift from Neville. Bellatrix choked on her own laugh, and then toppled. Cheers erupted from every corner, and now all eyes turned to Voldemort, who was dueling simultaneously Ron, Hermione, and Luna. "Don't touch them!" shouted Harry as he finally revealed himself, and the other three retreated into the crowd. And more cheers erupt at the sight of Harry alive, who tells everyone to stand down. Now it's just him and Voldemort. "It's over, Tom. You've corrupted your own army, and now you stand surrounded by enemies. There are no more Horcruxes, and there can be no escape. You've lost." Voldemort laughs in response.
"But perhaps you do not understand, Potter. There can be no power greater than I. I, the most powerful wizard in the world, have just become master of this wand. Dumbledore's wand. The Elder Wand."
"You're wrong. And if you try to kill me again, you won't just fail to kill me like you did earlier tonight. but it'll be the last thing you ever do.
What is this? You think you can defeat me? That somehow you are more magically powerful? That you have a wand more powerful than mine?
I do. In fact, I think it is you who do not understand, Tom. You are not the master of that wand.
Oh, but I am, Potter. Much has happened on this night, although you are right. Even I believe perhaps I was not the master of the Elder Wand because I had not killed the man who killed its previous master, Dumbledore.
And who do you think killed Dumbledore? Shot back Harry with the air of someone who absolutely knows the truth.
Severus Snape. I see how foolish it was now to entrust him with that hand, but see how fate favors Lord Voldemort. I sought to kill Snape this very evening, but discovered his betrayal, much like the fools around me, had already finished him off.
You're right about one thing. Severus Snape did betray you, but not tonight. He's been working against you ever since you tried to kill my mother, and he never killed Dumbledore. I watched his memories tonight. He faked the entire thing. Dumbledore died of his own accord after drinking the potion you made in that cave.
But then I did kill the previous Master Potter.
Yeah, you did kill Dumbledore, but someone else claimed mastery of the wand first, and on your orders. As usual, like you did with your followers tonight, you are your own worst enemy. Before Dumbledore died, he was disarmed by Draco Malfoy.
Well, I must thank you, Potter. That really does clear things up. Draco disarmed Dumbledore, you say? Well, I'm not sure if you've been paying attention, but I have just disarmed him in return.
Somewhere in the crowd, George Weasley yells, "Boo!"
What you may have missed in all the confusion, Potter, is that after I attacked Draco, this wand glowed in my hand, the same way my first wand did all those years ago in Ollivanders. The Elder Wand has chosen me.
You still don't get it, do you? You continue to make the same mistake over and over because you can't understand the true power of love. And Harry could feel the moment approaching as he gripped his father's wand tighter, keeping it aimed at Voldemort. My mother beat you 17 years ago. She beat you by sacrificing herself for me. She didn't need to die, but she chose to anyway.
And yet here I stand before you, Potter. Where is your mother now?
I've seen her. Tonight, actually. She's whole and happy and proud of her son. And I've seen you too, what you become in death. You're foul. You're disgusting. You can't even move.
You dare!
Yes, I dare. When you brought yourself back to life, you took my blood. And in doing so, you brought my mother's protection into your body. She's with you wherever you go.
Your filthy mother is dead.
Yes, but she's beaten you. Think, when did that wand choose you? When you attacked Draco? Draco, who had just stood up against you to protect everyone from you? Voldemort stared back, anger on his face, taking in every single word. The wand chooses the wizard, Tom. Or in this case, the witch. That wand didn't choose you. It chose my mother, whose protection lives in you. Voldemort looked stunned, but recovered quickly.
But it makes no difference then, Potter. Your mother is not here. Even if you are right, then we duel on skill alone.
Actually, she's more here than you think. Before he died tonight, Severus Snape gave me this wand, my mother's wand, which he recovered from my house because he loved her, and it chose me. And if the Elder Wand chose my mother, and her wand chose me, then I am the master of the Elder Wand. And then, with both his parents' wands leveled at the enemy, Harry shouted his spell at the exact same time as Voldemort.
Expelliarmus! Avada-kedavra!
And Voldemort's spell backfired into himself. The Elder Wand sailed through the air, and Harry caught it. Voldemort fell backwards, dead. Epilogue!
But Dad, why do I have to take the train when you could just use flu powder?
Oh, come on now, son. I once had to hunt down 5 unknowable dark treasures and destroy them, and sacrifice myself to destroy the darkest wizard alive. I think you can handle a little train ride. Besides, it's all part of the experience. I met your mother and my best friend on my first train ride to Hogwarts, you know. I'm not your best friend, chimed in Hermione. Of course you are, dear, said Harry. I was just telling Albus here about the first time we met. Did I hear you right? I'm not your best friend, said Ron, arriving behind them at platform 9 3/4 with Luna. Of course you are, dear, said Harry, and they all laughed. How's Aquila feeling about heading off for her first year? Hermione asked Ron. Oh, I think she's excited. Really, it's little Leo here who's been the trouble. He's so eager to go himself. Same with Lily here, said Harry, motioning to his youngest child and only daughter. Yes, Harry still has 3 kids, and they have the same names. I think he would name his kids the same way. Obviously, though, they are different people, since they have a different mom. Draco was also, as usual, present at the platform, although, admittedly, still armless and helping his young son onto the train. And I thought for a while about who Draco might be married to at this point. In the main story, it's a woman named Astoria Greengrass, who's a completely off-screen character. And it occurred to me that Ginny might be a viable option here, since she and Draco were both possessed by Voldemort back in Chamber of Secrets, and Draco has like such a more dramatic reform, like over to the good side. But I'd love to hear what you guys think. Who would Draco end up with in this version of the story? Make sure you don't give this one any special treatment, eh, Potter? Says Draco. Of course not, Harry replies, unless, how is he on a broom? Harry jokes. But it's in that moment that Harry notices his middle son Albus, who's about to board the train for his first year, is sitting alone quietly, staring at the train. Nervous? Harry asks. What if I'm not in Slytherin like you and James? He asks. Oh, son, it doesn't matter what house you're in. I'd be proud of you even if you ended up in Gryffindor. At these words, Hermione swings her bag to clunk Harry on the head. In fact, Harry lowers his voice to a whisper, I want you to come to my office when you have a break period later this week. I have a gift for you. Really? What is it? Oh, I think you'll find it very useful. I gave your brother your grandfather's wand, but what I have for you has been in our family much, much longer, Harry said mysteriously. But seriously, son, I know I'm your dad and head of Slytherin House, and it might be a little awkward that I'm the one teaching your friends defense against the dark arts, but I'll be proud no matter what house you're in. In fact, the Sorting Hat even considered putting me in Gryffindor. Really? You? Really. But that is a different story. The end. Oh my gosh, you guys, that was seriously a wild ride. It's probably the hardest I've ever worked on any project ever for Super Carlin Brothers. So thank you so much for watching. I really hope you liked our take on this of what if Harry was in Slytherin. This has seriously been a labor of love for the past 2 months. So just thank you again for watching. It really means so much to me. And if you're new to the channel, if you just found us from the What If Harry Is in Slytherin series, I hope you will leave this video a like and consider subscribing as well. That would be awesome. And if you want to see another big 7-part series we did about Harry Potter, I totally recommend you check out this video right here, Dumbledore's big plan and how Dumbledore was pulling the strings on Harry Potter's life throughout all of his years at Hogwarts. It is an equally crazy adventure. But otherwise, Ben, until next time, I will see you in another life, brother.